Burlington, Vermont, October. The sky the color of an old bruise. Cold enough to see your breath. Cold enough to know. A man stands alone in an empty parking lot. No job, no plan. He just signed his name on a document that ended the life he knew. Not because he did anything wrong. Because someone needed a person to disappear. And he looked like the kind of man no one would come looking for. $42 in his wallet. He drives, then stops. A dead bus stop on a corner where no bus has come in 5 years. A woman sitting alone in the early dark. Expensive luggage. Gray eyes that have been holding something together for a very long time. She doesn't tell him who she is. He doesn't ask. He opens his wallet. Hands her his last $40. And that single moment, a man who lost everything, still giving away the last thing he had, is what brings 4 black SUVs to his front door the following morning. He has no idea what is coming. Neither does the man who framed him. The heater had been broken for 3 weeks. Anthony Wilson knew this the way he knew everything about this building. Not because anyone filed a maintenance report. Not because a supervisor walked the floor and noticed. Because he was the one standing in it at 6:47 in the morning, watching his own breath curl up from his mouth like smoke, from something that had already gone cold. The break room was 8 feet by 10. 1 folding table, 4 plastic chairs, one with a crack running diagonal across the seat that everyone avoided without discussing. A microwave with a stain on the interior ceiling that had been there since Anthony started. A bulletin board with the same OSHA poster it had always had, and a sign-up sheet for the holiday potluck that nobody had touched since November, because it was now October and nobody had thought to take it down. The clipboard on the counter was cold against his palm. The pen didn't work. He pressed hard, scribbled circles in the corner of the sign-out sheet, the pen scratching dry against the paper. 3 circles. 4. The ink came through on the 5th, and he signed his name. And that was the last ordinary thing that happened that morning. He knew, later, that he should have noticed something earlier, the specific quality of the quiet, when he'd come through the loading dock. The way the night crew guys had looked at him, and then looked away, which was different from the way they usually didn't look at him at all. He had cataloged these things without reading them, the way you catalog weather without checking the forecast. And he had walked to the break room and picked up the clipboard and pressed the pen down 4 times before the ink came. 32 years old. 2 years and 7 months in this building. He knew which loading bay door stuck when the temperature dropped below 25. Knew which forklift pulled left on a wet floor. Knew that the fluorescent light above Station 4 buzzed exactly 3 times before it steadied into its usual hum. Every shift. 3 buzzes, like it was clearing its throat before speaking. He knew all of it. The ink finally came through. He signed. Kevin Moore appeared in the doorway, not walking in. Already there, the way bad news is already there when you turn around. You didn't hear it arrive because it didn't need to announce itself. 46 years old, navy polo shirt that was on its 2nd day minimum, hair thinning at the front in the specific way of a man who had been losing that particular argument with his own scalp for years, and had decided the comb forward was a solution rather than a statement. Arms crossed over his chest. The posture of a man who had already decided how this ended and was now just executing the decision. Wilson, flat. The tone of someone reading from a script they had written themselves and practiced. Coleman wants you in his office. Anthony set the pen down. He did not turn around right away. He stood with his hand still near the clipboard and looked at his own signature on the paper. The letters sitting there ordinary and unbothered, not yet knowing what was about to happen to them. Then he turned. End of my shift. I know when your shift ends, then you know I'm done. Coleman's office. Now, 2 years and 7 months. Kevin Moore had never once called Anthony by his first name. Anthony had filed this observation in the drawer, where he kept things that were not his problem. That drawer had gotten full over the years. He was starting to think he should have gone through it sooner. Starting to think some of what was in there had been his problem the whole time. The walk from the break room to Terry Coleman's office was 400 feet. Past the loading dock where 2 guys from the night crew were finishing a pallet, not looking up. Past the row of forklifts lined up like sleeping things, patient and enormous in the early morning half-light. Past the bulletin board where someone had pinned a birthday card for a woman named Brenda who Anthony was fairly certain had stopped working there 14 months ago. The fluorescent lights overhead ran their usual hum. Everything smelled like cardboard and diesel, and the chemical sweetness of the floor wax they used on Sunday nights. Coleman's door was open. When Coleman's door was closed, he was on the phone with his daughter or eating a sandwich. When it was open, it meant something else. It meant he wanted whatever happened next to have witnesses at the edge of the hallway. The door as announcement. The open door as a kind of theater for the people passing by. Terry Coleman looked up from his desk when Anthony came in. Big man, mid-50s, the kind of build that had once been substantial and had redistributed itself over time into something more considered. He had a photo of his grandkids on the desk, 3 of them, youngest maybe 4, in a backyard somewhere green. He had a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a gift from his daughter who had meant it as a gentle joke, and Coleman had received it with the sincerity of a man who was genuinely trying. Anthony had always liked him. Not the way you liked a friend. The way you liked a man who remembered your name and asked how your kid was doing, who showed up on the floor sometimes just to walk it, who had once stayed an extra hour helping unload a shipment when they were short-staffed. That kind of like. The kind that made what was about to happen worse. Anthony sat down without being invited. Kevin Moore came in behind him and stood against the wall. Did not sit. The choice to not sit put him in a different category from participant. More like a wall fixture that had been there when the room was built, neutral and present, and not responsible for anything. Coleman looked at his desk. Not at Anthony. That was the first real sign. Not the open door, not Kevin in the doorway, but this Terry Coleman, who always looked at you when he talked to you, looking at his desk. "There's been a situation," he said, "with the Redfield medical shipment." Last Tuesday, Anthony waited. He had learned, across a decade of overnight shifts and loading docks and the specific arithmetic of physical work, that waiting was its own kind of information. What people said when you gave them space to fill it was usually more accurate than what they led with. 11 crates didn't arrive. Didn't arrive where? Anywhere. They signed in here. Signed out of dispatch. The truck made Albany. 11 crates weren't on it when it got there. Very still. Anthony went very still, which was different from nervous. Nervous people shifted. Still people were doing something else. Running a parallel calculation. Checking the numbers against what they knew. Looking for the shape of the thing. That's a significant amount to lose between here and Albany. That's what the insurance company said. He understood the shape of the conversation now. He felt it the way you feel a room get colder. Not dramatically, not a wind through an open door. Just the air changing its mind about the temperature. Unmistakable once you'd spent enough time in cold places. Coleman, even. Careful. I didn't take those crates. I know you didn't, Anthony. Then what are we doing here? Coleman's voice had the quality of a man stepping across something he wasn't sure would hold. The dock camera. Tuesday night, 11:47. You were on the dock alone. 6 minutes. I close up every Tuesday. That's the job, I know. That's the job you gave me. I know, Anthony. Then, the problem, Kevin Moore said from the wall, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a sentence that had been waiting a long time to be said, is that the paperwork shows you signed the last 4 crates onto the truck at 11:51. 4 minutes after the camera showed you moving things in areas it doesn't fully cover. Anthony turned in his chair to look at him. Kevin's face was doing nothing, which was itself a thing. A blank face on a man watching another man's life change was not neutral. It was a choice. What did the camera show more? You moving crates. Off camera some of the time, I was doing my job, you were off camera doing it. Kevin, the name like something placed down with care, on a surface that might not hold it. You were here Tuesday night. I saw your truck in the lot when I... No, I wasn't. Your truck was. You're mistaken. The word dropped into the room the way something dense drops from height. Not thrown, just released. And the weight of it was not in the word itself, but in the certainty behind it. The absolute calm of a man who had rehearsed this sentence and knew exactly what it would do when it landed. Anthony felt his face go warm. Not anger. Not quite. Something older and colder than anger. The specific recognition of something being done to you, carefully, with preparation, the way you recognize a mechanism in the moment before it closes around you, and understand both what it is and that it is already too late to step back. He turned to Coleman. Coleman pushed a piece of paper across the desk, already printed, already signed by someone in HR whose signature Anthony had never seen before. Reason for termination, pending investigation, loss of corporate property, probable cause. The insurance company is driving this. Corporate too. They want someone off the payroll while the investigation runs. If it clears, I have a daughter. Quiet. Not a plea. Anthony Wilson did not plead. A fact presented for the record, because the record should contain it. She's 7. Her mother has been gone 4 years. Rent is due on the 15th. Coleman's face did the thing a good man's face does when he knows something is wrong and also knows the knowing changes nothing. I know all of it, Anthony. I'm sorry. You're sorry, I am. Anthony looked at the termination notice. His name spelled correctly. His employee ID correct. The date correct. Every administrative detail accurate except the foundational one. He picked up Coleman's pen and signed it. Coleman blinked, started to say something. Anthony set the pen down and stood up. I know, Coleman. He kept his voice level. I know. He moved to the door. Kevin Moore was still against the wall. Anthony walked past him close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Kevin did not move. Anthony did not look at him directly, only caught him at the edge of vision. Just enough. At the door, he stopped. He didn't plan what came next. It arrived the way certain knowledge arrives, not from reasoning but from the body, from the place below reasoning, where things are simply understood. Moore, a beat. 2. What, your lanyard's showing? And Kevin Moore's hand went to his collar before he could stop it. Fingers finding the cord under his shirt, the key to the temperature-controlled storage unit that was supposed to live in the supervisor's lockbox according to company protocol, and instead lived against Kevin Moore's sternum, under his clothes, like a secret he'd carried so long he'd stopped feeling the weight of it. His fingers found it. He looked at Anthony. Anthony looked back. Neither of them said the rest of it. The rest of it was already in the room, taking up space. Not needing words, Anthony walked out. The parking lot was cold in the practical Vermont October way, not theatrical, not making a statement, just factual. The air was what it was at this time of year, and had no interest in your reaction to it. He stood next to his truck without opening the door. 2003 Ford Ranger. 214,000 miles on it, the windshield crack that had started at the bottom right corner and worked its way up to the middle with great patience, where it was currently waiting to see what came next. He'd bought it 3 years ago from a man in Rutland who'd needed cash faster than he'd needed the vehicle. Second most expensive thing he owned. The first was Lily's mattress, because Lily's mattress mattered and his didn't. He got in, sat. Did not start the engine. The sun was working its way up over the Green Mountains in the reluctant manner of October sun in Vermont. Not rising so much as arriving, late, with no explanation offered. The sky was the color of a bruise at the stage where it had stopped hurting and become simply a color. Everything looked farther away than it was. The mountains, the edge of the building behind him, the rest of his life. He thought about calling his sister Renee in Phoenix. They talked 4 times a year, roughly, in the way of people who had grown up close, and then ended up living different versions of adulthood in different time zones. Last call, she'd said, if you ever need anything. And he'd said, I know, and she'd meant it, and he'd meant that he knew and he was not going to call. He thought about Angela Young, Lorraine's mother, 3 blocks north on Maple Street, in a house that smelled like whatever was about to come out of the oven, and the particular settled quiet of a woman who had survived the worst thing and built something around herself on the other side of it. Angela had offered help twice, with money, directly and without drama. He'd declined both times. He was not going to be the man who took money from the woman who had buried her own daughter. He thought about Lorraine 4 years. Still sometimes woke reaching for the other side of the bed before the rest of him caught up. His body ran its own schedule for grief, independent of everything else, and it had not received any memo about updating. Some mornings the reaching felt like information his body was still processing. Most mornings it just felt like reaching. He started the truck, let it warm up. Then drove home the long way through downtown because he wasn't ready yet. Not for the stairs. Not for the apartment. Not for the particular look his daughter got when she understood something had changed before he'd found the words for it. Lily was sharp. Got that from Lorraine. Got most things from Lorraine. He was going slow on Chestnut when he saw the woman at the bus stop. The stop at the corner of Chestnut and Vine had been inactive since 2019, when the town redid the transit budget and cut the route. The sign was still there. The bench was still there. The little plastic shelter with its slightly crooked roof was still standing, because nobody had gotten around to taking it down, and in the meantime it kept its shape out of some structural stubbornness, continuing to serve a function it no longer had. Anthony had always found something quietly sad in that. A thing maintaining its form after losing its purpose. The woman on the bench was maybe 30, a small black suitcase beside her, the expensive kind, recessed wheels and a telescoping handle that locked at 3 precise heights. Wool coat, leather gloves, hair pulled back in a way that had started intentional and been revised by a long night into something looser. She was looking at her phone with the fixed blankness of someone who had been staring at the same screen too long and stopped actually processing what was on it. Anthony drove past, slowed down, thought, "Go home, you have enough for one morning," and kept slowing and made a U-turn at the next light. The Ranger didn't do this gracefully. It did it with determination, and came back and pulled up in front of the shelter and rolled down the passenger window. Cold came in immediately, not waiting to be invited. He was aware, with the clarity he always carried in situations that could tip either direction, of what this looked like from the outside. A big man in a work jacket, with a cracked windshield at 7 in the morning. He accounted for all of it. Kept his hands on the wheel where they could be seen. Kept his voice at the specific register that was the opposite of threatening. He had learned this accounting early and it had become automatic. "Excuse me," even, non-threatening. "That bus doesn't come here anymore. They cut the route back in 2019. She looked up, gray eyes. The specific tiredness of someone who had been managing something difficult for long enough that the management itself had become the main occupation and was currently at the point where the cost of the managing was exceeding the budget for it. "I'm sorry?" "This stop. They cut the route 5 years ago. Whatever you're waiting for isn't coming down that street." She looked up Chestnut, then back at him. Her face reorganized itself around the new information with the controlled efficiency of someone who did not enjoy being surprised and was not going to let anyone see exactly how much. "I wasn't waiting for the bus. I was waiting for a car. App-based. It's canceled twice. Out here before 8, you'll be waiting a while. Not much driver coverage in this part of town. I'm beginning to understand that, and there was something in the dryness of it. The very faint suggestion of a person quietly laughing at their own situation from some distance that made him want to keep talking to her. "Where are you headed?" A hesitation. Half a beat, just enough to be there. "Burlington." Eventually is an unusual word for a Tuesday morning. Her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one the terrain a smile would occupy if it got far enough along. "My car broke down on the interstate last night. Got a tow to the nearest exit. Walked in. Every motel I tried said they were full. I've been sitting here since about 4. Anthony registered that. 4 in the morning. 3 hours on a bench in October in Vermont, which was its own particular kind of hard. "I'm not usually like this," she added, and he caught the edge of it. The pride of a person whose systems had failed them, and who needed to put that on the record. "I'm generally quite organized. Everybody's organized until the situation stops cooperating. A beat, that's not a flaw, that's just weather." Something in her face eased, just slightly. "There's a diner on Main, 3 blocks west, open since 6. Warm inside, which is its primary virtue at this hour. I can drop you off." She measured him the way people measure things they are genuinely trying to assess. He let her. He would have done the same. "I can call you a cab instead," he said. "From my phone. I'll cover it." She tilted her head. "Why would you pay for a cab for a stranger?" He thought about it. Not performing the thought. Actually having it. My wife used to say the world runs on people doing small, stupid things for each other. He paused. I don't know if she was right. But I figure I'm not going to find out by sitting it out. She went quiet for a moment. Your wife sounds like someone worth listening to. She was the tense. She heard it. She didn't push on it, no face. No condolence. No reflexive expression of sympathy. That was more about the discomfort of the person offering it than the comfort of the person receiving. She just let it be what it was, which was the right thing to do and the thing most people didn't do. I'll take the diner, she said. If the offer is still open, she stood, lifted the suitcase, heavier than it looked. She had to adjust her grip and reset her posture, and waved him off when he moved to help, carried it to the truck bed herself, and lifted it in with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been managing their own things, independently, long enough that it had become the default setting. She got in the passenger seat. The cab felt smaller with another person in it. He had forgotten, somewhere in the last 4 years, what that felt like, an adult presence in the other seat, the shift in air, the sense of the space recalibrating. Lily sat there sometimes with her library books and her sticky hands, and the smell of whatever she'd eaten for breakfast, but that was different. That was his. This was something else. Anthony, he said, pulling back onto Chestnut. Sandra. She was looking at the windshield. Just Sandra for now. Understood. A block of quiet. Can I ask you something? Her voice from the passenger's side. Go ahead. You look like a man who had a bad morning before this one even started. He checked his hands on the wheel. Knuckles. Yeah. He made himself ease the grip. I got fired about 45 minutes ago. I'm sorry. Yeah. She waited. Then, what happened? They think I stole something I didn't steal. She turned to look at him then. Actually turned. Why didn't you? Not an accusation. Genuine. The question of someone who wanted to understand the actual math of the situation. He thought about it. Gave it the weight it deserved. Because my daughter is 7 years old. And someday she's going to have to do something hard. And I want her to be able to do it. Not because I told her she could, but because she watched me do hard things first. Without cutting a beat. That's the only thing I actually have to give her. Sandra didn't answer right away. Then, that's a real answer. It's the only one I've got. The diner came up on the left. Helen's in red neon. The E burned out so it read H-Lens in the gray morning. A name that had lost something and kept going anyway. He pulled into the lot. Here you go. Thank you, Anthony. She reached for the door handle. Stopped. Could I ask one more thing? I'm past being surprised this morning. My wallet is in my car, which is at a tow yard somewhere off exit 14. She glanced at the diner. That sign in the window says cash only before 9. He was already reaching for his wallet. 2 20s. 2 1s. $42 total. Everything between this moment and whenever unemployment might come through. 2 weeks out at minimum, probably 3, and that assumed the claim didn't get tangled up in whatever Kevin Moore had arranged for him. He pulled out both 20s. She looked at them. Looked at him, Anthony. No. Take it. I meant like $10. Take it. That's $40. I know what it is. You just lost your job? I did, and you have a 7-year-old, who I'm going home to. Even. Settled. You're going into a diner alone in a city you don't know. $40 is not going to save my life, but it might make your morning less bad for an hour. That's a trade I can make. She looked at the bills. Looked at his face. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't name and didn't try to. Complicated. Real. Not performed. The face of a person receiving something they hadn't known they needed and weren't entirely sure how to carry. I will pay you back. Not a social script. A statement of intent. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She took the bills slowly, the way you accept something you're not comfortable accepting but have no graceful way to refuse. Got out. Retrieved the suitcase from the truck bed without help. Stood in the lot holding it, the folded bills in her other hand, looking at him through the open window. Anthony Wilson. Yeah. You have a good face. He didn't know what to do with that. I don't know what that means. Neither do I. Level. Direct. But you do. She closed the door. He sat in the lot and watched until she was through the diner door. Watched the yellow warmth of the interior take her in, and then he backed out and drove the rest of the way home with $2 and his own company and the quiet of a truck cab that someone had just left. The apartment on Birch Street was on the second floor of a 3-story walk-up above a laundromat. The laundromat gave the whole building its permanent smell: warm lint, fabric softener, the pleasant ghost of someone else's clean clothes. He climbed the stairs, the banister wobbling on the left side the way it had for 6 months while he'd been meaning to fix it. Lily was already at the table, pajamas, hair in every direction, cereal dry from the box because they were out of milk, which she had not mentioned and would not mention. Library book open in front of her, chapter book, a girl who could communicate with horses, reading level several grades above what 7 technically required, which was just Lily, which was just Tuesday. She looked up when the door opened. "You're home early." He hung his jacket, took off his boots, stood in the kitchen for a moment just looking at her. The cereal box with the cartoon bee, the morning light coming sideways through the window over the sink, the library book she'd close without marking her page because she never needed to mark her page. She just remembered. "Come sit with me for a minute." She read his face, closed the book. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table, the one with 4 chairs they never used all 4 of at the same time. A window over the sink looked out into the narrow alley between buildings. There was a tree out there that had no business surviving Vermont winters and came back every spring anyway, bare-branched now but present. Some things happened this morning. Lily waited. This was one of the things about her. She understood that silence was sometimes where the important part of a sentence lived, and she didn't try to fill it. "I lost my job." Half a beat. "Okay, I'm going to find something else. But for a while, things might be a little tighter than they are now." Tighter than now? Not complaining. Confirming the data. "A little." She nodded. "Filed it. Can we still get the boots?" "The boots, right," he had promised. Her current ones had a hole developing at the left toe that she had been managing for 2 weeks with a folded paper napkin stuffed inside, and he knew about the napkin because he had noticed it one morning, and she had noticed that he had noticed, and neither of them had brought it up, in the unspoken agreement of people who understood that some problems got smaller if you didn't look directly at them, while they were still unsolvable. "Not this weekend, Lily, but soon, soon." "Yeah," she nodded once more. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. Her hand was small. Something on the palm, dried and faintly sticky. Probably yesterday's juice, the remnant of a cup she'd had after school. He didn't ask about it. "Bah, yeah. Did you do anything bad?" "No, okay." Not relief. Not even quite a question. The confirmation of something she had already decided. A fact she was stating because facts deserved to be stated. "I know you didn't." Simple. The way you say something true that stopped needing verification. He held her hand. She held his back. Hard. The way she always held on when she meant it. Like she was making sure the grip registered all the way through. The rest of the day was the arithmetic of bad days. Phone calls that went to voicemail. An unemployment application online that timed out twice at the documentation page, and the third time he submitted it, he had no way to know if it had gone through or vanished. $4 of gas from the change jar because the Ranger was below a quarter tank. Grilled cheese for Lily at lunch, crusts for himself, and he was not tragic about this, just accurate. At 3:30, he walked her to the free afternoon program at school. God bless the free afternoon program. And on the way back stood at the corner on Birch, looked up at the October sky, and said out loud to whatever might be in the vicinity of listening, "I just need one break." That's it. One. Nobody answered. He had stopped expecting anyone to answer from that direction a long time ago. He sat on the couch and stared at the wall and thought about Kevin Moore's hand going to his collar. The specific speed of it. Before Kevin could think to not do it, 447, unknown number called. He let it go 452. Same number, 458. Third time. He picked up, Anthony Wilson, a pause, then a woman's voice. And the strange thing that happens when you hear a voice you've only heard once briefly, in completely different circumstances. Recognition that is imperfect and total at the same time. This is Sandra. From this morning, he sat up straighter. "Hey, I wanted to thank you again. You really don't need to. I'd like to repay you in person. Are you home tomorrow morning? Almost a smile. I'm home every morning for the foreseeable future. Could I come by? Around 9, he hesitated, because this was strange. Because she had his number, and he had not given it to her. And she had arrived at a dead bus stop with expensive luggage, and had sat there from 4 in the morning without falling apart, and she was calling now from an unknown number wanting to come to his apartment. How did you get this number? I have resources. That is genuinely not an answer, I know. I'll explain tomorrow. 9 o'clock, he thought about Lily at school, the $2 in his wallet. The termination notice with his name spelled correctly, and everything else about it wrong. He thought about a woman in a diner parking lot saying, "You have a good face," with the directness of someone stating a fact rather than offering a compliment. And the way she'd taken the money, slowly, like someone accepting a thing they weren't comfortable with, but had no graceful way to refuse. 9 o'clock, he said. Thank you, Anthony. Sandra. Yes, who are you? A pause, longer than the others. The pause of someone deciding how much to let through and from which angle to let it. Someone who owes you something. Quiet. Even. I'll see you at 9. She ended the call. Anthony held the phone and listened to the empty line for a moment. Then he set it on the coffee table and went to the window. Below on Birch Street, the laundromat sign hummed. An older man walked a small brown dog past the building, both moving at the pace of creatures who had arrived at a mutual understanding about the value of not rushing. A car idled in front of the building across the street, then moved on for reasons of its own. He did not know, standing there, that 4 black SUVs had been arranged to drive down this street in the morning. He did not know Sandra's last name. He did not know that the lanyard under Kevin Moore's shirt was one component of something much larger and much more deliberate. He did not know that the worst day he'd had since Lorraine died was also, in some accounting system he had no access to yet. The most important, he knew the street, the laundromat hum, the $2 in his wallet, and the specific quality of a voice that said someone who owes you something, and meant it in a way that had dimensions he couldn't see yet. He didn't sleep well. He hadn't slept well since Lorraine, which was 4 years, which was long enough that poor sleep had stopped being an event and become a climate. He lay on his back in the room that used to be theirs and was now just his, and looked at the water stain on the ceiling. The one that had been there when they moved in, and that he'd been meaning to paint over for years, and had stopped noticing, and now noticed only late at night, when there was nothing else to look at. It looked roughly like the state of Michigan, if Michigan had stopped caring about its own accuracy. At 2 in the morning it became something with wings. At 3, it became the face of Kevin Moore. Still doing nothing, still certain he had arranged things correctly. Anthony got up. Kettle. The kitchen floor cold through his socks. The window over the sink looking out into the alley where the tree stood bare-branched and present, continuing its unreasonable project of survival. Light in the window of the building opposite, 3rd floor, a woman he had never met, standing at her own kitchen counter, face lit by a phone screen, doing what he was doing, which was being awake in the middle of the night, with things sitting on her. He found this steadying in a way he couldn't have explained to anyone. The specific comfort of not being the only one. He used a tea bag he'd already used once. He'd started doing this the previous month. 1 bag, 2 cups, a small economy that cost almost nothing and felt like something. Lorraine would have had opinions. She bought fresh flowers every Saturday, not because they could afford fresh flowers, but because she said it kept the house from knowing they were broke. He had thought about that logic often in the years since. Whether a house could know things, whether the flowers had worked, he drank the tea on the couch and watched the window do its slow progression. Dark to the particular dark that preceded dawn, then the gray that was Vermont's version of early morning, the gray of a sky that hadn't committed to the day yet, 7:14. Still at the window, 1 hour and 46 minutes, he woke Lily at 7:30. Last of the peanut butter on toast, scraped thin across both pieces because it needed to make it to the end of the jar. He brushed the back of her hair while she brushed the front. She had jurisdiction over the front. This was the arrangement they had negotiated over time, and it worked. She put on the boots with the hole in the left toe, the napkin inside, and did not mention it. At the corner, Angela Young was already there, 62 years old, Lorraine's mother. She wore her red coat, too light for October, but she hadn't found a replacement she liked as much and refused to retire it until she did. Around her neck was Lorraine's scarf, the one Lorraine had knitted the winter before the diagnosis. Gray wool with small irregular stitches where her tension had changed. Angela wore it to every important day. She had worn it to the funeral. She wore it now. She saw Lily from half a block away and opened her arms. Lily ran the last 20 feet. Anthony. Angela looked at him over Lily's head, the eyes of a woman who had survived the unsurvivable and come out the other side with vision that noticed things other people's vision passed over. Angela, you look terrible. I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine, he didn't answer. She studied him the way she studied everything, taking inventory, deciding what to do with what she found, and then made the small nod she made when she was setting something aside to return to later. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. Yeah. Lily turned from Angela and ran back to him and wrapped her arms around his waist with the full force of her. Not gentle about it, never gentle about it. The hug of a child who wanted to make absolutely certain the contact registered all the way through. Then she ran back to Angela and took her hand. She looked back once, waved, turned the corner and was gone. He walked home slowly. Ice on the sidewalk in the thin, early way. Not real ice yet. The suggestion of it. A rehearsal. A man across the street argued with a snowblower that hadn't been started since March. The snowblower lost. The man addressed it in a language Anthony didn't know but understood perfectly from tone. Back to the apartment at 8:22. He made his bed for the first time in 3 weeks. He didn't examine the impulse. Wiped the kitchen counter. Put away the 2 clean dishes from the drying rack. Stood in the middle of the living room and looked at it with the eyes of someone seeing it new. The couch that sagged on the left side. The lamp from the thrift store on Riverside that had cost $2 and worked perfectly. Its only virtue, and a sufficient one. The bookshelf he'd built himself from reclaimed pallet boards. Uneven, solid, holding Lily's library books and one framed food photograph of Lorraine at a lake in the Catskills, the summer before the diagnosis, laughing. Hair going every direction. Caught in the middle of something she thought was funny because it was. He felt something adjacent to shame looking at the apartment. Allowed himself to feel it for exactly a moment. Then let it go, because there was no version of the next hour in which this apartment became a different apartment, and pretending otherwise was a waste of time he didn't have. 8:56. He heard engines, not one. 4 staggered slightly, the sound of vehicles traveling in a loose formation that stopped outside. He walked to the front window, pulled back the curtain. 4 black SUVs parked on Birch Street. Large, clean, the kind of vehicles that had never been on an unpaved road and showed it in every surface. 3 of them with doors opening, men in dark suits stepping out, 2 from the first, 1 from the second, 2 from the third. The 4th remained closed, engine still running, the driver's silhouette visible behind tinted glass. He counted again. Let the curtain fall, stood in the center of the living room. He was holding a dish towel. He set it on the arm of the couch. Below, a car door opening, footsteps on concrete. The building's outer door, which always banged against the mailbox housing when it opened because the spring was too tight, and it banged now. Footsteps on the stairs, measured, not hurried, not avoiding being heard. The footsteps of someone who had no reason to hide what they were. 3 knocks. The knocks of someone who knew exactly how many to use. Anthony walked to the door and put his hand on the knob. He stood there for a moment. Not from fear, exactly. More from the recognition of a threshold. The sense that whatever was on the other side of the door was going to be permanent in a way that this side wasn't. That the stepping through was going to be irreversible regardless of what was waiting. He opened the door. The man outside was in his 50s. Tall, clean-shaved, the build of an athlete from a previous decade. A Bluetooth earpiece in one ear. The stance of someone who had spent years understanding where to position his body relative to other people's. Not threatening, just precise. Not smiling, not frowning. Professional in the way of people for whom professional was a mode that didn't turn off. Mr. Wilson? Yeah. My name is Darnell Cooper. I work for Ms. Anderson. She's in the vehicle. She wanted to know if you'd be willing to come down and speak with her. Anthony looked at him, looked past him at the stairwell window, and threw it at the roof of one of the SUVs. Anderson. Sandra Anderson. He turned the name over, felt the edge of something. The half recognition you get when you've encountered a name in a context you can't immediately locate, like hearing a song and knowing you know it without knowing from where. 1 minute, he said. Of course, don't do that. Darnell Cooper went still. Then something at the corner of his mouth considered becoming something and decided against it. All right. Anthony closed the door, stood with his back to it for 3 counted seconds, then went to the bedroom and put on a clean shirt, the blue flannel that had been Lorraine's father's, bought at an estate sale, a size too big on Anthony's frame, but broken into something soft and dependable. He looked at himself in the dresser mirror. He needed a haircut. He had needed one for 2 months. Nothing to be done about that in the next 90 seconds. He went downstairs. Darnell Cooper fell in 2 steps behind him, not beside him. The specific positioning of who had spent years calibrating exactly where they were supposed to be relative to the person they were with. Outside on Birch Street. The men in suits held their positions, 1 at each end of the block. 1 watching the alley, 2 near the vehicles, none of them looking directly at Anthony, all of them looking at everything adjacent to him, which was another way of looking at him with maximum coverage and minimum appearance of doing so. Darnell walked him to the 4th SUV and opened the rear door. Sandra Anderson was inside, different coat from the bus stop. Charcoal, longer, cut with the precision of someone who understood that how you clothed yourself communicated something, and had decided to be deliberate about what. Her hair was down and brushed, sitting on her shoulders with intention. She looked rested in the way of someone who had decided not to let a sleepless night be visible on her face. The eyes were the same, gray, still tired underneath, but a different quality of tired now. Not the tired of someone holding something together at the end of a long night, but the tired that comes after a decision has been made and the deciding is finished. Anthony, steady. Please get in. He got in. Darnell closed the door behind him. The sound it made was the sound of something engineered specifically not to rattle, not to leave gaps, to close completely and finally every time. Heavy and finished, inside, warm. The smell of leather and coffee. A steel thermos on the center console, 2 paper cups, Sandra already pouring into one of them as he settled into the seat. Black all right, however it comes. She handed him the cup. Her fingers were cold against his for half a second. He took it. Looked at her directly. She looked back without any movement toward looking away. You weren't stranded, he said. Not a question. A statement waiting to see if it would be corrected. No. No broken down car. No. You weren't waiting for a ride to Burlington. Not in the way I described. He nodded. Set pieces in order. The way you set pieces in order when you understand the shape of something, but not yet all its dimensions. So when you were at that bus stop. I was there for reasons that had nothing to do with you. Her voice was even precise in the way of someone who had learned that precision was a form of respect. You stopped. I didn't arrange that. I only chose what to do with it. That's a fine distinction. It's an accurate one. He looked out the window at his own building. The 2nd floor window. The curtain he had been holding from the inside 40 minutes ago. Then he looked back at her. Tell me who you are, and Sandra Anderson. Sitting in the back of a black SUV on Birch Street, in Burlington, Vermont. On the worst morning Anthony Wilson had experienced since burying his wife. Told him her name was Sandra Anderson. She ran a company called Arden Supply Chain. Medical equipment, electronics, agricultural materials, infrastructure goods. Operations across 32 states. 18,000 employees. And one of those operations, one of those thousands of pieces of the machine, was a subsidiary called Midwest Logistics, the company that had just put Anthony Wilson's name on a termination notice with everything spelled correctly. He let that sit in the air between them for a moment. Then he set his coffee cup down on the center console and looked at the dashboard and then back at her and said, very quietly, You knew that when you were sitting at the bus stop, I knew you worked at one of our facilities. I knew there had been a disciplinary event that morning. I did not know yet that it was you specifically. She held his eyes. I put it together that evening, after you called me. Before. The call came after I knew. He looked out the window again. The laundromat. The second floor curtain. Why were you there? He said. At that bus stop. At 4 in the morning, she was quiet for a moment. 6 months ago, I stopped trusting the reports I was getting about how my company operated. The numbers that come across a desk, the summaries, the dashboards. They tell you what the system is designed to tell you. They don't tell you what the system is designed to hide. She turned the paper cup once in her hands. So I started going to places where we operate. I dress down. I go early. I sit where people can see me or where I can see them. I watch. I've been doing it in 8 cities over 6 months. And Burlington, the facility on Roper Road, has been a concern for 14 months. I've been watching it for 6 weeks. A pause. The bus stop at Chestnut and Vine is half a mile from the rear gate. Anthony's were quiet for a moment, and the $40 was $40 you gave to someone you thought was a stranger who needed it, on the worst morning you'd had in a long time. She looked at him steadily. I am going to tell you why I came here this morning, but first I need you to understand something. All right? What I'm going to ask you is going to sound like it's about the money, about the termination, the settlement, the job. And those things are real, and they matter, and I intend to address them. She paused. But what I'm actually asking you is something different. And before I ask it, I needed to meet you. I need to sit in this car and look at you and know whether my read of you was accurate, or whether I had made an error. And I don't make this kind of error, she said. But I needed to check. Anthony picked up his coffee cup again, drank. Let the silence do what it needed to do. Tell me what you need, he said, and she did. The building outside Montpelier had no sign. It sat back from Route 2, behind a row of white pines that were doing their usual Vermont job of blocking the wind and incidentally blocking the view of everything behind them. A gravel drive, a small guard hut at the entrance with a man inside who waved them through without looking up from whatever he was reading. The parking lot held maybe 30 cars. Hondas, Subarus, a Chevy pickup with a cracked taillight, an old Volvo with a dented rear quarter panel. Regular cars. The kind of cars people drove when they were not trying to communicate anything with their cars. Anthony had expected something that looked like a spy movie. This looked like a regional accounting office that had seen better decades. What is this place? He said as Darnell opened the door for him. It used to be a printing plant. Sandra stepped out on her side. My grandfather owned it. He was in commercial printing for 40 years. When he died, the building came to me with everything else. She moved toward the entrance with the unhurried pace of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had never needed to look like she was in a hurry to get there. We retrofitted it about 20 years ago. It's where I send work I don't want discussed at the main office. Off the books, off the visible record. Which is different from illegal. She glanced at him. Though I understand the distinction isn't immediately obvious from the outside, inside, bright, clean, and purposefully quiet. An open workspace with perhaps 30 people at desks, most of them looking at screens, a few talking in voices calibrated not to carry. Nobody looked up when Sandra came in. Not performing the not looking. Not looking. Genuinely not looking, because they had long ago arrived at the understanding that, if they looked up when she entered, she would find them something harder to do than what they were already doing. A woman crossed toward them from the far end of the space. Patricia Johnson, tall, mid-40s, a gray suit that had been chosen for function over statement, and still managed to make a statement. Reading glasses on a silver chain around her neck. The kind of presence that took up more room than her physical dimensions accounted for. Not loud, not aggressive, just substantial in some way that registered before you had words for it. Wilson. Her voice was even informational. It's Anthony, a pause. She considered this. Anthony, I'm Patricia Johnson. I run internal compliance. You'll report to me. She turned on her heel. Come. Sandra's was already 3 steps away, moving toward a man who had materialized with a tablet and an urgent expression. She didn't look back. Anthony followed Patricia. She won't be at your orientation, Patricia said without turning. She has 17 things to do before 11. You'll work primarily with me, is that a problem? I don't have problems with organizational structure. Do you? No. Good. She pushed open a door at the end of a short hallway. Come in. Sit down. Sign the paperwork first, then read it. That's backward. You're on a clock. Read it after. If you object to something, come to me and I'll listen, and then most likely tell you no. She set a folder on the table. Sit. He sat. The conference room was small and functional. One table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard on the wall with something written on it in blue marker that had been incompletely erased. The ghost of a previous operation still faintly visible. On the table, a thick NDA, a contract, and a settlement agreement with a physical check attached by a paperclip. He looked at the check, $60,000, his name on the payee line. Already printed, it'll clear by Friday, Patricia said. Deposit it today. Don't carry it around. He looked at it for another moment. Then he started signing where she pointed. The NDA was 14 pages. The contract specified his role, Deputy to the CEO for Field Operations, a title that communicated seniority, without specifying exactly what he would do, which was apparently the point. The settlement agreement characterized the $60,000 as compensation for wrongful termination, structured as a legal resolution rather than a payment, which meant it arrived without the tax complications a direct payment would have brought. Someone had thought carefully about all of this. More than one someone. Annualized, that's $84,000, Patricia said. 6-month contract to start. Extension options are in the appendix. He finished signing. Patricia collected the papers with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and would do it again. Now, she stood. Come with me. She walked him down another hallway to a smaller room, no windows. 3 monitors on a desk, a whiteboard covering most of one wall, and a chair that was visibly aggressively uncomfortable. On the whiteboard, a chart in blue marker. Dates, times, names, arrows connecting them, and in the lower left corner his own name, with an arrow pointing to it and 2 words written beside it, framed. October 14. He stood in front of it for a moment. This is where you work, Patricia said. That is your desk. The chair is bad. I apologize for the chair. Procurement has been an ongoing situation. What happened to the person who had this desk before? There was no person before. This position was created for this investigation. She crossed to the whiteboard and stood beside it. Here is the only speech I will give you. After this, I communicate in tasks and deadlines, so listen. He listened. She said, the people who do this kind of theft don't think of themselves as thieves. They think they're underpaid. They think the company owes them what they've taken. They think they're clever. And this is their primary operational weakness. Because clever people leave tracks they can't see, because they can't imagine that anyone is looking. The supervisor who arranged your termination does not believe he did anything wrong. He believes he protected an operation he built by removing a variable he couldn't control. When we put him in a room with lawyers eventually, he will not apologize. He will tell you it wasn't personal. He will believe this completely. She paused. Do you understand why that matters? It tells me how he thinks. It tells you how he'll behave, which tells you how to position things when the time comes. She picked up a blue marker and turned to the whiteboard. We know most of what happened. We don't know all of it. Specifically, we don't yet know who above Kevin Moore in the organizational structure was directing this. We believe there is such a person. Your job is to help us identify them. Because you worked that facility for 2 years and 7 months, and you know things that are not in any of our reports. Things like what? Things like which loading bay cameras have been repositioned in the last year. Things like which dispatchers work late without logging overtime. Things like the sound a temperature-controlled unit makes when it's been opened and closed too many times. In one night, she set the marker down. We have the data. You have the texture of the place. We need both. Anthony looked at the whiteboard, at the names, at the arrows, at his own name in the lower left corner with the word framed beside it. When do we start? He said. You just did. Patricia walked to the desk and opened a file on the monitor closest to the door. These are the dispatch logs for the Redfield medical shipment. I want you to look at them and tell me what you notice. He sat in the bad chair, pulled himself up to the desk, looked at the screen, Wackel variances. Timestamp logs. The kind of data that looked like nothing until it started looking like something, and then it was hard to understand how you'd ever looked at it without seeing it. He read through the first sheet, then the second. Something in his brain did the thing it did when it found a pattern before he'd consciously identified it. The sensation of almost sneezing, a recognition arriving ahead of the words for it. These variances, he said. Most of them are within normal packing tolerance, yes, but some of them are outside it. And they're not random. He leaned closer. There, he looked at the dates. They're all Tuesdays? Yes, Tuesday nights. Between 10 and midnight? Yes. He sat back in the bad chair, which protested. When the dock's supervisor closes out the shift, Patricia looked at him with the expression of someone who had expected this to take longer. Welcome to the investigation, Anthony. The first week was numbers. He had not expected that. He'd expected something more like the investigations on television. Photographs on whiteboards. Men in suits drawing lines between things. Someone saying we need to go deeper while looking meaningfully at a map. What he got was a bad chair that started hurting his lower back by 11 in the morning, 3 monitors that were always on, and numbers. Weight variances, timestamp logs. Badge swipe records in and out of every secured area of the facility, going back 14 months. GPS data from the tractor-trailer fleet. Temperature logs from the climate-controlled storage units, which ran on a sensor system that generated a data point every 6 minutes. He had not understood, until that week, how much data a warehouse generated. A single Tuesday night at the Midwest Logistics Facility on Roper Road produced enough log data to fill a small book. And across 14 months of Tuesday nights, the pattern that emerged from that book was not subtle once you knew to look for it. Patricia worked him hard. She was not unkind about it. She brought him coffee twice, unprompted, and on Thursday, she set a sandwich on the corner of his desk without comment, apparently having noticed he had not left the building for lunch. But she was not warm either, exactly. She would put a file on his desk and say before lunchesh. She would come back at 11:50 and hold out her hand. If the analysis wasn't ready, she didn't scold him. She just looked at him for 3 seconds with the eyes of someone recalibrating an estimate, and the next morning the file she left was larger. He understood her by the 3rd day. She was not testing whether he could do the work. She was testing whether he could do it faster than he thought he could. He could. He got home by 5 every evening. Sandra had been specific about this. A car at 4:30, reliable, no exceptions. The driver was Jason Walker, who had a beard like a 19th century general, and drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and never asked how Anthony's day was, or made any conversation at all. Anthony had thought this might bother him. It turned out to be one of the best parts of the commute. He picked Lily up from Angela's at 5. Most evenings she had something to tell him. A book she was into, something that had happened at school, an opinion she had developed about something during the day. He listened to her the way he had not listened a year ago, when he had been too tired for the full bandwidth of her. He was still tired, some evenings, but it was a different kind of tired. The kind that came from doing something rather than from enduring something. On Thursday the check cleared. He deposited it on his phone, standing in the parking lot of the building outside Montpelier, and then sat in Jason Walker's car on the drive back into Burlington, feeling like a man who had misread a label on something. That Friday he stopped at the mall on the way to pick up Lily. He bought the boots. Brown, lined with something soft, a size and a half too large so she could grow into them. He bought a winter coat she didn't quite need yet. He bought gloves. He put the bags on the kitchen table when he got home. Lily came out of her room and saw the bags and walked toward them the way she walked toward things she wasn't yet sure were real. Carefully, not wanting to close the distance too fast in case they turned out to be something else. She opened the bag, looked at the boots, looked at him. Bah, yeah. This is a lot. I had a good week at work. She lifted the boots out of the bag, held them with both hands and looked at them the way you look at something you stopped believing was going to arrive. She did not squeal. Lily was not a squealer. She held the boots for a long moment and then said, very quietly, "Can I put them on even though we're inside?" "You can put them on, Lily." She sat down on the linoleum and unlaced them with her small, serious hands, and put them on, and walked around the kitchen for 10 minutes without saying anything, just walking. Anthony stood at the sink and pretended to wash a dish that was already clean. That was the first week. The second week was when he noticed the car, a gray Toyota Camry, with a small dent in the front bumper. He saw it behind him Monday morning on the way to the building outside Montpelier. He told himself he was being paranoid. Saw it again Tuesday morning. Same car, same dent. That evening, coming out of Angela's building with Lily, he spotted it parked on the cross street with a line of sight to Angela's front door. He said nothing to Patricia until Thursday. He told himself he was waiting until he was sure. The truth was, he had been giving the car the benefit of the doubt, which was a habit Patricia had already identified in him and which he was working on. Thursday morning, he told her. She did not laugh, did not say he was overreacting. She picked up her phone, dialed an extension, and said, "Get me the registered owner of a gray Camry that followed our guy in this morning. Partial plate 774. She hung up. She looked at him. "You should have told me Monday. I thought I might be wrong, Anthony." Her voice didn't change temperature, but its weight did. "Your instincts are good. The problem is you extend good faith past the point where it serves you. When something feels off, tell me, especially when you're not sure yet." Especially then. Her phone rang 97 seconds later. She listened. Said 2 words, "Thank you," and hung up. The Camry is registered to a leasing company in Burlington. The leasing company services small businesses. One of those businesses is a private investigator named Dale Roford. He is not a sophisticated operator. The kind you hire when you can't afford sophisticated and you want eyes on someone. She set the phone down. "Someone paid him to watch you. Kevin Moore. I didn't say Kevin Moore. Is it Kevin Moore?" A pause. "It is Kevin Moore. The plan. Let the Camry watch. Let it see a man trying to put himself back together after losing his job. Let it see exactly what Kevin Moore wanted to see. In the meantime, Patricia would put someone on Roford, and through Roford on everyone Roford reported to, and there would be a man on Birch Street at night, outside watching the building. Anthony wouldn't see him. He wouldn't knock. He would be there. Angela has Lily some evenings, Anthony said. Keep that going. How many buildings from you? 3. Good. Keep it that way. He went back to the windowless room. Sat in the bad chair. Looked at the whiteboard, which had acquired new things over 10 days. Photographs now, printed from security footage and surveillance. Kevin Moore walking to his car in the facility parking lot, the image grainy but clear enough. A man named Brian Thompson, Regional Operations Director, whom Anthony had met exactly twice in 2 years and 7 months. Both times a handshake, with one hand while the other checked a watch. And a woman he had never encountered, whose name was Stephanie Harris, who worked in corporate accounts at the Burlington headquarters, and whose existence Anthony had not known about until that morning. Patricia had briefed him on Stephanie Harris over the sandwich she'd left on his desk. Stephanie Harris was the one who signed the paperwork. The invoices that moved missing inventory from the Midwest Logistics manifest onto a ghost shipping record, routed through a shell company in Atlanta, then through a second company in Denver, then to a private warehouse outside Worcester, Massachusetts, where the inventory was broken down and sold through 3 separate channels in the gray and black markets for medical equipment. The whole operation had generated, across 14 months, something in the neighborhood of $11 million. Kevin Moore's cut, approximately $800,000. Stephanie Harris, just under $400,000. Brian Thompson, the rest. Thompson had recently purchased a vacation property on Lake Champlain. He had quietly paid off a divorce settlement that had been going very badly for him. His son was at a private university in Rhode Island. The son did not know, as far as anyone could determine, that his last 2 semesters of tuition had been paid with money stolen from hospitals, 1 insulin pump at a time. Anthony looked at the whiteboard for a long time that Thursday afternoon. Patricia came in around 3. "You look upset. I'm thinking about Thompson's son." "What about him? He's going to find out. When this comes apart, he's going to read about his father in the news before anyone calls him." Patricia sat on the edge of the desk. She took her reading glasses off their chain and held them. Not putting them on, just holding them, which Anthony had come to understand, was what she did when she was going to say something she had thought about carefully. "That is going to happen," she said. "Whether you help us or not. The only thing your involvement changes is how soon, and how cleanly, and how much of the collateral damage can be contained." She turned the glasses once in her hand. "If this resolves in 2 months instead of 6, the exposure for people adjacent to the crime is smaller. If it goes through a structured legal process rather than a chaotic federal one, Thompson's ex-wife, who is not involved and didn't know, has a settlement agreement that our legal team can structure to include the son's remaining tuition." She looked at him. "If you walk away, none of that happens. The son still loses his father. He just loses him more loudly. I'm not telling you to feel good about it," she added. "I'm telling you to keep working." Anthony looked at the photograph of Stephanie Harris, at Thompson, at Kevin Moore. "Okay," he said. He went back to work. He did not see Sandra again for 10 days. Patricia mentioned her twice in passing. "Miss Anderson wants the midweek update by Wednesday morning. And Miss Anderson asked whether you were settling in. I told her you were." That was all. Anthony did not ask more. He was being paid to do a job, and the job was the job, and he was not there to think about the woman who had hired him. He thought about her anyway. Not in any way that required examination, he told himself. Just in the way you thought about people who had done something unexpected and were therefore not yet categorized. He thought about the way she'd said most things are arithmetic. He thought about the $40 she'd taken slowly, the way you accept something you're not comfortable accepting. He thought about your wife, sounds like someone worth listening to, and the way she had heard the tense and not pushed on it. And he thought about how rare that restraint was. Monday of the 3rd week, he was in the windowless room at just past 4 in the afternoon, looking at a weight variance spreadsheet without reading it. The day had gone long in that specific way where time expanded rather than moved. He was about to close the file. The door opened behind him. "I'll have the Stephanie Harris summary for you first thing tomorrow." He assumed it was Patricia. That's good to know. He turned in the chair. Sandra was in the doorway. Black sweater, dark jeans. Boots that were meant for walking rather than offices. Her hair pulled back. Her face slightly flushed from the cold outside, which meant she'd come in recently from somewhere that wasn't this building. "Miss Arden." "Celeste." Then she caught herself. "Sandra. I'm sorry. Old habit. Sandra, please." He looked at her for a moment. "Old habit from what? My middle name is Celeste. My grandfather called me that. I forget sometimes which name I'm in." She stepped into the room and looked at the whiteboard, which had grown considerably since the last time anyone from outside the building had been in here. "You've added a lot." Patricia did most of it. Patricia's handwriting is worse than that. She tilted her head, reading. "Half of this is yours. My mother was a school teacher. That tracks." She looked at the whiteboard for another moment, then back at him. "Are you almost done? I can be, then finish." "I'll wait." Nobody had ever stood behind him while he worked before. He was aware of her silence in the way you were aware of weather. Not intrusive, just present, and he found that he worked more carefully than usual, checking each step before moving to the next, which was probably not the effect she intended, but was the effect she produced. He saved the file, closed the spreadsheet, shut down 2 of the 3 monitors. "Walk with me," she said. Outside, the gravel path that went around the building was in shadow by 4:30. The sky was the dark blue of late October at altitude, and the first star was already visible over the pines. The parking lot lights were the orange sodium kind that made everything look like a photograph, taken in the wrong light. They walked without speaking for the first 30 feet. "How's Lily?" Sandra said. "She's good. She has the boots now. That's good." "Another 20 feet, Sandra." He said it without preamble. "You didn't come out here to ask about Lily." "I did, actually. But also not only." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. They were at the bend in the path where it turned, and you could see out over the tops of the pines, to the hills beyond, brown and gray in the failing light. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." "All right, do you trust me?" He thought about it. Not performing the thought, genuinely. taking the time to find an accurate answer. Not yet, he said. Not fully, she nodded slowly. That's the right answer, because it's true, yes. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the hills. Then, I need to ask you to do something I can't ask through Patricia. Something I need you to do for me directly, and I need you to know that if you say no, there will be no consequences for that. I will not hold it against you. And if you say yes, I am going to put you in a room with a man and ask you to tell him something that isn't true. Anthony was still. Which man? Brian Thompson. He had not expected that. He'd expected Kevin Moore. Kevin was the one who had the Camry watching Birch Street. Kevin was the one whose hand had gone to his collar. But Thompson was higher. Thompson was the one who had built the financial architecture, who had the lake house and the tuition payments, and the carefully structured flows of money. What do you want me to tell him? I want you to go to his office and tell him you have information that could clear your name. That you've been looking at things, old schedules, paperwork, numbers that don't add up, and that you're willing to make it disappear for a price. I want you to ask him for $60,000. He'll know I already received $60,000. He won't. Foal, your settlement was processed through a legal entity that has no visible connection to Arden or to Midwest Logistics at his level of access. His visibility into the lower tiers of the organization is less than he believes it to be. He will not be able to verify your situation quickly enough for it to matter. She turned to look at him. He will want to believe you're desperate enough to try this, because believing that is more comfortable than the alternative, and you want him to say something on record. I want him to confirm on audio that he knows what happened. Not to confess. That would be too clean and too suspicious. Just to talk about it. The way someone talks about something they assume you already know. She paused. We have the data, we have the paper trail, but a federal case needs testimony from someone who was present in the physical operations of that dock, and it needs Thompson to be visible enough in the record that there's no argument about where the authority was coming from. So I wear a wire, yes. He looked at her. She looked back with the steadiness of someone who had made the decision before coming outside and was now waiting to see what he would do with it. Celeste. He caught himself. Sandra, I've never done anything like this, I know. I don't know how to be that kind of person in a room. You do, she said. You just don't know you do. You are going to go in nervous. You are going to look like a man who has been pushed into doing something he doesn't want to do. That is not a performance. That is the accurate description of what will be happening. She paused. All you have to do is let him see it. And then ask for the money. What if he says no? If he says no, nothing happens to you legally. You will have taken a meeting with a senior executive of a company connected to your former employer and suggested you had information. You didn't execute anything. You didn't take anything. You walked in and you walked out. She held his gaze. The only thing that happens if he says no is that we go back to the slower process. Through the courts. Federal cooperation. Another 6 months at minimum, and in those 6 months, more shipments go missing. Probably 2 more. And when those come apart, someone else gets put on a termination notice. With their name spelled correctly. He stood there in the cold, with the hills going dark behind the pines. If things go wrong inside that meeting, my security team will be outside. You'll have a word. If you say it, they come through the doors. What's the word? You choose, he thought about it. Burlington, he said. Why Burlington? Because I have no reason to say Burlington in a normal conversation with those people, and because that's where Angela was born. Lorraine's mother. She's from Burlington, originally. Sandra looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. If you say Burlington, they come in. He breathed out. When? This Thursday. Thompson's office. He thinks you're coming to appeal your termination. He agreed to see you because he thinks he's being generous. She paused. Patricia will brief you Wednesday. And if Thompson says something useful about who's above him in this, her eyes stayed steady. That would be the most useful thing of all. Okay, he said. She held out her hand. He took it. She held it for a moment, not a shake, just a hold, brief and deliberate. And then she let it go. Anthony. Her voice was different for just a second. Not the CEO voice. Something below that. Be careful. I'll be careful. She looked at the hills. My father owned a company before I did, she said. said it. It came out quietly, like something she had thought about saying for a while, and was saying now because now was the time. He was not a dishonest man, but he was not an honorable one either. He built things quickly and didn't ask too many questions about how the people under him built things. When he died, I inherited a company with a reputation for results and a reputation for being a little dirty, and I spent the first 5 years of my ownership trying to clean it. She paused. I thought that by the time I was 30, I would have made it a clean company. How old are you now? 30, a beat. And my company is not clean. And I realized 2 years ago that part of the reason it isn't clean is that every generation of executives under me has learned to tell me what I want to hear, the same way they learned to tell my father what he wanted to hear. I cannot trust what comes to me through channels. I cannot trust the briefings or the dashboards or the quarterly summaries. The only thing I can trust is what I see with my own eyes in places where they don't know I'm watching. She looked at him. So I go to bus stops. Anthony was quiet, and sometimes, he said, a man in a truck pulls over, and sometimes that. She turned toward the building. Go home, Anthony. Sleep. Thursday morning, drive yourself. He almost asked why drive yourself. Then understood. Because someone in the parking lot at Thompson's office needed to see the 2003 Ford Ranger with the cracked windshield. Because Anthony Wilson needed to arrive, looking like Anthony Wilson. Not like someone who had anything other than desperation and a calculation of odds behind him. Thursday, he said. He went home. Wednesday was Patricia's day. She sat across from him in the conference room from 8 in the morning until just past noon, walking through the meeting with the thoroughness of someone who understood that preparation was the only part of this she could fully control. Your goal is simple, she said. You are not there to confess anything. You are not there to accuse anything. You are there as a desperate man who did his math and decided that selling his silence was better than having none. She set a printed sheet on the table. Thompson is intelligent. He's been in corporate environments for 30 years. He will try to read whether you're alone in this or whether someone sent you. Your job is to be completely convincing as a man who has no one. That's not a hard performance. She looked at him for a moment. No, I suppose not. She turned to the next page. He will ask who sent you. Deny everything. He will suggest you're working with a lawyer. Deny it. He will ask if you went to anyone inside the company. Deny it. She paused. He will probably offer you less than 60,000 or offer to connect you with someone who will provide it outside any traceable channel. Either way is acceptable. What we need is for him to say on audio that he is aware of what happened. Not a specific description of the crime, just awareness. The way you'd talk about something you didn't need to explain because the other person already knew. And if he doesn't, we conclude the meeting, you leave, and we return to the legal route. You are not worse off, she put down the sheet. But he will, you're sure. I'm sure because I understand what kind of man he is. He built something elaborate and he believes it held. He believes Kevin Moore cleaned up the problem. He is going to hear you describe what you know, and he is going to conclude that you are exactly what you appear to be. A man who was given a piece of the picture accidentally and is trying to monetize it before it expires. She held his eyes. He will underestimate you. He has been underestimating people like you for his entire career. That is why we picked this approach. Thursday morning, Anthony got up at 5:30. He showered, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, in the quiets of the apartment before Lily woke and drank the coffee, and thought about nothing in particular, which was what you did when you had done all the thinking you could do, and the remaining variable was just the doing. He woke Lily at 7. Told her he had a work thing, and would pick her up from Angela's at the regular time. Is it a good work thing or a hard work thing? Both? Probably. Okay. She hugged him around the waist, the full weight hug that was her signature, and went to brush her teeth. He was in the parking lot of the Midwest Logistics corporate office on the east side of Burlington at 9:47. He sat in the Ranger with the engine off for 90 seconds. Not thinking. Just letting not thinking become the actual condition of his body before he walked in. The morning was cold and clean. The kind of October sky that had decided to be blue and meant it. He got out the lobby. Marble floors, recessed lighting, a security desk with a woman who called up to Thompson's floor with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. On his way to the elevator, he passed a gray Camry with a small dent in the front bumper, parked in the visitor lot. He did not look at it. In the elevator, alone, going up, he thought about what Patricia had said on Wednesday. You are going to be nervous. Let him see it. The nervousness is the truth. Everything else is incidental. The elevator opened on the 6th floor. Brian Thompson was waiting for him at the elevator bank, hand extended, smile in place. The smile of a man who had practiced it until it no longer required thought. Ryan, good to see you. Come on back. Anthony shook the hand. Soft, as he'd expected. It's Anthony. A small pause. Of course, Anthony. My apologies. Come on in. The office was a corner one with 2 walls of windows. The Green Mountains were visible to the east, clear and brown and unhurried. Thompson's desk was large mahogany, or something meant to suggest mahogany, the kind of desk that communicated that decisions was made behind it were permanent. He gestured Anthony to one of the 2 chairs in front of it and took his own chair behind it, establishing geography that meant something. So, Thompson leaned back slightly. Comfortable. A man on his own turf, dealing with a situation that he had handled before and expected to handle again. I understand you wanted to talk about the termination. I want you to know, Anthony, that from my perspective, the way that was handled wasn't ideal. You're a good worker. Everyone at that facility says so. The insurance investigation complicated things. Anthony looked at his hands. Let them be slightly unsteady, which was not difficult because they were slightly unsteady. I appreciate that. Mr. Thompson, Brian, please, Brian. He let a breath out through his nose. Slowly, the breath of a man who had rehearsed this and was now discovering that rehearsal and doing were not the same thing. I've been going over a lot of things since October 14th. A lot of nights looking at numbers, old schedules, weight logs from the weigh stations on 89. He paused. I have a good memory for numbers. Always have. Thompson's face didn't change, but something behind it did. Anthony caught it. The smallest adjustment, the way a door closes very quietly somewhere in a large house, and you feel the change in air pressure, rather than hearing the sound. Okay, Thompson said, I noticed something. About the Tuesday nights, and about the weight variances, and about the pattern of which loads ran light versus which ones didn't. Anthony looked up, made himself hold Thompson's eyes. Let the nervousness be visible. And I noticed that the paperwork on our end has the same initials signing off every time something went wrong. Same person. Corporate accounts. Thompson was very still. Anthony, his voice was carefully calibrated. Cautious now, but not yet defensive. I want you to think about what you're saying. I have been thinking about it. For 3 weeks, he leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who has arrived somewhere he didn't plan to be. I have a 7-year-old daughter. Her mother's been gone 4 years. I can't get hired in logistics anywhere in this state. The termination follows me. I need to get out. Get somewhere else. Start over. He paused. I need $60,000. And then I lose my paperwork. And I sign whatever you need me to sign on my way out. And I never say another word about Tuesday nights. The silence in Thompson's office was the specific silence of 2 people in a room where the power had just shifted, and both of them were recalibrating. Thompson looked at him for a long moment. Anthony could see him running the math, not the financial math, the human math. Was this man alone? Did he have a lawyer? Had he talked to anyone inside the organization? Was he stupid enough to have come here by himself or smart enough to pretend to be? The math tipped. Anthony watched it tip on Thompson's face. The moment the calculation resolved, the very small relaxation of a man who has decided that the fly in front of him is one he can catch. 60,000, Thompson said slowly, is a significant number. Yes, sir. I don't have that kind of money available to me personally. Not quickly. Not without. He stopped. But hypothetically. Hypothetically, if someone were to help you with a transition like that, make things easier, there might be a way to structure something that worked for both parties. He met Anthony's eyes. Through channels that didn't go anywhere visible. You understand, I understand. And in exchange, whatever you think you found goes away. All of it. I leave the state. You never hear from me again. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Give me a number where I can reach you." Anthony gave him the number Patricia had designated. "Someone will be in touch." 48 hours. Thompson stood, signaling the meeting's close. He walked around the desk, hand extended again. "Anthony, I want you to know. You made a smart decision coming to me instead of somewhere else. I'm going to take care of this." Anthony shook the hand. "I appreciate it." At the door, Thompson put a hand briefly on Anthony's shoulder, testing the weight of him, the feel of him, the way you'd press on something to see if it was solid or hollow. "Take care of yourself." "Yes, sir." Anthony walked to the elevator, pushed the button, waited, did not look back at Thompson's office, did not change his face, did not breathe differently. The elevator came. He rode it down alone, walked across the lobby, out through the glass doors, across the parking lot, past the gray Camry, into the Ranger, started the engine, pulled out of the lot onto the access road, drove for exactly 1 mile, then quietly to the air inside the truck. Burlington, 2 miles behind him, in a nondescript sedan, Daniel Brooks, the red-haired technician who had fitted the wire that morning, with the patience of someone who had done this before, and understood that the people he fitted were going to be scared, and that being efficient about it was a form of kindness. Pressed his headphones closer and said, very calmly, into the receiver, "We have it." Anthony drove south toward Montpelier. His hands were still shaking. They had been shaking the whole time, and he had let them shake, and Thompson had seen the shaking and read it as fear of consequences rather than what it actually was, which was the particular tremor of a man doing something that cost him something, in the service of something that mattered more. On the highway, past the second rest stop, he started laughing. Not because anything was funny, because his body had to do something with what it was carrying, and laughing was the thing it chose. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then it was done, and he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. And he kept driving. The conference room at the building outside Montpelier was already full. When he walked in 20 minutes later, Patricia, at the head of the table, Darnell Cooper against the wall with his tablet. 2 people Anthony didn't know, a man and a woman, both with laptops. A federal attorney named Carol, mid-50s, with the manner of someone who had no patience for imprecision, who Anthony had been briefly introduced to on Wednesday and had immediately liked, and Sandra. Sitting at the far end of the table, a pair of headphones pushed down around her neck, looking at the door. She stood up when he came in, did not smile. Her eyes were very bright. "Thompson," she said. "He'll send someone. 48 hours. Said he'd structure it outside visible channels." Anthony sat down. Someone had put coffee in front of his chair. He talked around it. Didn't say specifically. But he talked around it the way you talk around something when you assume the other person already knows the shape of it. Sandra nodded. Sat back down. She looked at Carol. Carol opened a folder. "The audio is clean. The language is indirect, but sufficient for probable cause, combined with what we have in the documents." She looked up. "We proceed to the next phase." Patricia was already writing on her notepad. Sandra looked at Anthony across the length of the table. "You did that well," she said. "It didn't feel well. It never does." She turned the fountain pen in her hand. The pen she always had. Black barrel, gold nib, the one she said had been a gift 3 years ago that she was increasingly uncomfortable keeping. "It felt like you were going to be sick for the entire duration. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel." Anthony looked at the coffee, picked it up. His hands had stopped shaking somewhere on the highway. "There's more," he said. Everyone at the table went still. He didn't say anything specific. "But when I described what I knew, the Tuesday nights, the weight variances, the corporate initials on the paperwork, he didn't look surprised. He looked like a man hearing a description of something he was already familiar with." He set the coffee down. And then, right at the end, when he was walking me to the door, he put his hand on my shoulder. And I had the feeling. He stopped. "What feeling?" Patricia said. "The feeling that he was reporting upward in his head. Like what I just told him was information he needed to pass along." He looked at Patricia. "Thompson isn't the top." The room was very quiet. Patricia and Sandra exchanged a look. "No," Sandra said carefully. "He isn't. Who is?" Pause. "That's what Thursday was supposed to tell us," Patricia said. "And it did." She turned to Carol. We'll need to broaden the filing. Carol was already writing. Sandra looked at Anthony. Something in her face that he couldn't read completely. Complicated, careful. A door that was open exactly as wide as it needed to be, and no wider. One more thing, she said. And this is the last thing I'm going to ask you. He waited. When this is over. When Thompson is in a room with federal agents and the full picture is on a table in front of a judge. She paused. I want you to be there, in the room. When we close it, he looked at her. Not as a witness, she said, as a member of this team. I want the people who decided you were expendable to understand what that decision ultimately cost them. She held his gaze. Can you do that? He thought about Kevin Moore's hand going to his collar. He thought about Terry Coleman's eyes on his desk rather than on Anthony's face. He thought about his own name, spelled correctly on a termination notice. Everything accurate except the only thing that mattered. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Patricia closed her notebook. Then we have work to do. She looked at the two people with laptops. Get me the full org chart for Midwest Logistics and every entity above it in the Arden structure. I want it on my desk in 2 hours. She walked out. The room began to move. Anthony sat at the table for another moment, the coffee going cool in front of him, and thought about Thursday morning and Lily asking, is it a good work thing or a hard work thing? And him saying both? Probably. Both, yeah. He finished the coffee, stood up, got back to work. The suit fit. That was the first thing Anthony noticed on Tuesday morning, standing in the bedroom that used to be theirs, and was now just his. The suit Sandra's assistant had sent over Sunday night, in a garment bag with a handwritten note. Don't ask, just wear it, fit like it had been measured for him specifically, which it had been. Someone at the building, outside Montpelier, had looked at his coat, hanging on the back of a chair over the past 3 weeks, and done the math and placed the order accordingly. He stood in front of the dresser mirror, dark charcoal suit, white shirt with a collar that sat correctly. Dress shoes in the bottom of the garment bag, and those fit too. He looked like a version of himself he hadn't had occasion to be before. Not a false version, not a costume, just a version that had been waiting. Lily was gone. Angela had taken her at 7:15, earlier than usual, because Anthony had asked the night before, and Angela had said of course without asking why, which was one of the things about Angela Young that he had never properly thanked her for, and probably never would find the words for. Last night, at the kitchen table, Lily in her pajamas, watching him with the eyes she used when she was collecting information she wasn't ready to deploy yet. Bah? Yeah, you're not in trouble, not a question. He'd learned by now to hear the difference. No, Lily, I'm not, okay. She pulled her library book closer. Then, without looking up from the page, bah, you're not a bad person. He hadn't known what to say to that. He'd said, I know, baby, and she'd said, I know you know. I just wanted to say it out loud. And then she'd gone back to her book, with the absolute finality of someone who had handled what needed handling and returned to what she'd been doing. He thought about that, standing in front of the mirror. Then he put on the jacket, checked his watch. 8:47, 13 minutes, his phone buzzed. Patricia Johnson. One text, you're late leaving, he typed back. I know, 3 dots appeared. Then the suit fit? Almost a laugh. Yeah, good, drive. Don't think. He drove. The Midwest Logistics corporate office was on the east side of Burlington, a fuse of glass and brushed concrete that reflected the October sky back at itself, in a way that seemed to be making a point about something. Anthony had driven past it before, without registering it particularly. Now it had weight. It had a 9th floor with a specific office and a man in that office who had spent 3 years building something rotten inside something legitimate, and believed the walls were solid, taut. The parking lot had visitor spaces near the entrance. Anthony pulled in and sat, with the engine off for 90 seconds. Patricia had said don't think, and she was right, and he needed the not thinking to become the actual physical condition of his body before he opened the door. He looked at the sky above the building. Cold blue, the absolute blue of late October in Vermont, the kind of sky that had no patience for anything complicated. He got out the lobby. Marble and recessed lighting and a security desk and a young woman who called up to the 9th floor with the efficiency of 10,000 repetitions. Darnell Cooper was already inside, near the elevator bank, in a suit that managed to look like standard professional attire, while still communicating, to anyone paying attention, that Darnell Cooper had done things that professional attire didn't usually require. He gave Anthony one look. The look said ready. Anthony gave him nothing back, which was its own kind of answer. Patricia was already on 9, having arrived separately. Sandra was in the stairwell 2 floors down, waiting for the signal. Jason Walker and 2 others from the team held positions in the building that Patricia had marked on the floor plan Wednesday evening. The elevator opened on 9. The hallway was the specific quiet of spaces that had been designed to feel serious. Thick carpet, framed photographs of trucks and distribution centers and people who worked for the company and had been photographed being glad about it. At the end of the hall, a glass door with lettering that read Jeffrey Lewis, Chief Operating Officer. Anthony walked toward it, because this was what you did. Because Kevin Moore had put his hand to his collar before he could think not to, and Kevin Moore had believed that was the end of it. Because 11 crates of insulin pumps had not arrived at the hospitals that ordered them. Because a man had been careful enough to frame someone specific, and not careful enough to frame someone who would stay framed. He pushed through the glass door. The reception area was empty. Patricia had arranged for Lewis's assistant to be elsewhere this morning, some scheduling fiction that had been executed cleanly. The door to Lewis's office was ahead, closed. Through the frosted panel beside it, Anthony could see a shape moving, probably on a coal. He didn't knock. He opened the door. Jeffrey Lewis was at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, the posture of a man mid-sentence in a conversation he controlled. 58 years old. Silver hair kept close and precise, the kind of haircut that required maintenance and got it. A jaw that had looked authoritative at 40 and now looked like authority's older, more settled brother. White shirt, tie with a small embroidered sailboat pattern near the bottom. Discreet, chosen, the tie of a man who had a system for everything, including small decorative choices. He looked up when the door opened without a knock. His face made a small involuntary movement, the micro-adjustment of someone whose environment had just been entered without protocol, the body registering the wrongness of it, before the mind had processed what was wrong. He said into the phone, "I'll call you back." Set it down with the precision of someone buying themselves exactly 2 seconds. I wasn't expecting anyone this morning. Sandra came in behind Anthony, then Patricia. Darnell stopped at the threshold and the 2 team members positioned themselves without being told. "I know you weren't?" Sandra's voice had the specific quality it took on when deciding was already done and what followed was only execution. She walked into the room, the way she walked into every room she owned, which was directly, without adjusting for the furniture. "Good morning, Jeffrey." Lewis's eyes moved between Sandra and Anthony, the eyes of a man who had spent 20 years reading rooms and was now reading this one, running calculations at speed. "Sandra, careful now. I wasn't aware of a... This is Anthony Wilson." She said the name the way you say a name when the name itself is information. "He's my deputy for field operations." "You haven't met." Lewis looked at Anthony directly for the first time. Anthony looked back and did not look away. Deputy for field operations. Lewis processing it. That's a new role, 4 minutes old officially. In practice, about 3 weeks. Lewis kept his eyes on Anthony, the look of a man trying to access a file that isn't where it should be. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure, Mr. Wilson, level. No heat in it." "Not yet, Anthony Wilson. I worked for you indirectly. Burlington's distribution facility, warehouse floor. 2 years and 7 months, he held Lewis's gaze. Until Kevin Moore arranged for 11 crates of insulin pumps to go missing on a Tuesday night and put my name on the paperwork. The room went very quiet. Lewis looked at Sandra. His face had reorganized itself into something composed and careful. The expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and had a methodology for surviving them. "Sandra, I think it would be better if we handled this privately and..." "We're not handling it privately, Jeffrey." Her voice hadn't changed volume. "It didn't need to. You've had 3 years of private. That's finished now." Lewis was quiet. In that quiet, something happened that Anthony had been watching for without quite knowing he was watching for it. Lewis went still. Not the still of someone thinking. the still of someone who has completed a calculation and arrived at a result and is now deciding whether to dispute it. The math had resolved and he had accepted the result, and what remained was the question of how to move through what came next. He chose not to dispute it. Sandra's voice was even, with the weight of someone who had practiced precision long enough that it had become the natural shape of her speech. You were given a company I trusted you to run. You were given authority over operations in 32 states. You were given access to my name and my father's name, and I chose to extend that to you. A beat. You used all of it to build a theft operation that moved $11 million in medical supplies out of our distribution chain over 14 months. You built the internal reporting structure, specifically, to ensure that anyone below you who noticed anything would be ground up in the process before they reached anyone who could act on it. And when a warehouse employee named Anthony Wilson closed up his dock in a way that made certain patterns visible, you had Kevin Moore frame him. Lewis said nothing. You framed him, Sandra continued, because you decided he was the kind of person nobody would come looking for. You decided he was the kind of person who would take the paperwork and disappear. Anthony thought. He was not entirely wrong about the first part. There had been a version of October 14th, where disappearing was exactly what happened, where he drove home from the parking lot and filled out the unemployment form and told Lily things might be tight for a while, and never drove past a bus stop on Chestnut Street. But then he had driven past a bus stop on Chestnut Street. There is a federal team in the lobby of this building, Sandra said. They've been there for 6 minutes. They will come up when I send the signal. Between now and that signal, you are going to stand up from that desk. You are going to come out from behind it. You are going to give me the fountain pen I gave you 3 years ago when you told me, in writing, in good handwriting that I mistook for evidence of integrity, that the company's best years were ahead of it. Her voice did not waver. The pen is in the top left drawer. Then you will walk out into that reception area and sit down and you will wait. Lewis looked at the desk, a long moment. Long enough that the room existed as a room for a little while. The carpet, the framed photographs on the walls, the windows with the October hills beyond them going brown and gray in the distance. Then he stood up. He came around from behind the desk. He opened the top left drawer and took out the pen. Black barrel, gold nib. The kind of pen that meant something when it was given. He looked at it for a moment. His hand was steady. He was the kind of man whose hands were always steady, and Anthony understood now that this was not a virtue, that there were things a person should not be able to hold steadily, and the absence of tremor in Jeffrey Lewis's hand was a piece of information about who he was. He held the pen out to Sandra. She took it. "Thank you," she said. Lewis walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. He turned and looked at Anthony. "Mr. Wilson." His voice was controlled. The voice of a man who had learned to keep its instruments separate from what was underneath it. "I want you to understand, this was not personal." Anthony let those words stand in the air for a moment. He had been told they were coming. Patricia had said, 3 weeks ago in the windowless room, "He will tell you it was not personal." And he had nodded and filed it, and now here it was, in the room exact. He took his time, Mr. Lewis, even. Unhurried, that's the only thing it was. It was personal to me. It was personal to my daughter, who stuffed a paper napkin in her boot to cover a hole because I didn't have $40 to spare. It was personal to Lorraine's mother, who offered me money I refused because I was trying to carry my life correctly. It was personal to every patient in every hospital who waited on equipment that ended up in a warehouse in Worcester. He held Lewis's eyes without blinking. You didn't have to make it personal, because you were never the one who was going to pay for it. That's what you told yourself. A beat. You were wrong about the paying part. Lewis looked at him. Then he walked out. They heard his footsteps cross the reception area. The soft sound of him settling into one of the chairs to wait, because waiting was all that was left. Anthony stood in the middle of Jeffrey Lewis's office, in a suit that fit him, like someone had measured his life, and placed an order. Patricia opened her phone, dialed, said 2 words, "Send them up," and put it away somewhere below. In the marble lobby, 6 federal agents walked toward the elevator. Sandra was looking at the desk. at the chair behind it, empty now. At the window beyond the chair that showed the same hills from slightly higher than the floor below showed them, the added elevation giving them a different proportion without changing what they were. She was holding the fountain pen. Anthony came to stand beside her. Not close. Close enough. You did it again, she said. We did. You said what needed saying? I said what was true. He looked at the empty chair. Those aren't always the same thing. This morning they were. She was quiet. Then, without turning, I owe you an apology. You don't, I do. She turned to face him. My company built the conditions that made what Kevin Moore did possible. Not just Jeffrey, me. When I was 24 and didn't know how to run what I'd inherited, and signed documents I hadn't read, and delegated authority I should have held, I created space. And the wrong people moved into it. Her voice was steady. Not asking for absolution, just putting it accurately on the record. You ended up on a loading dock at 11:47 on a Tuesday night because of decisions I made, years before you ever applied for a job at my company. Sandra, I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm acknowledging it, I know. He looked at the pen in her hand. The gold nib, catching the morning light from the window. And I'm telling you the accounting closed out a while ago, on my end. You came back to Birch Street with 4 SUVs when you could have sent a check through a lawyer and never appeared in person. You gave me work that was worth doing and paid me what it was worth. And you asked me to walk into a room with a man who'd spent 3 weeks arranging for me to disappear. And you made sure I wasn't doing it alone. He paused. Whatever math you're still running on this, you can stop. She looked at him for a moment. The gray eyes, tired in a different way now. Not the tiredness of holding something up, but the tiredness that comes after you've set it down. Whatever happens next, she said quietly, finishing something she hadn't started. Yeah, he said. Whatever happens next. Below them, the elevator opened. The federal team moved down the hall with the unhurried pace of people who understood that urgency was mostly theater and the real work was in the paperwork. The rest of the morning was mostly paperwork. Lewis walked out through the lobby under his own power that had been negotiated, voluntary cooperation, in exchange for leaving without restraints visible to the building. He got into the back of a sedan, and the sedan pulled away. A few people on the sidewalk outside the building glanced at a silver-haired man in a white shirt getting into a car and looked away because there was nothing to see, which was the whole visible surface of 3 years and $11 million and a warrant signed by a federal judge at 8:43 that morning. Anthony watched from the 9th floor window. Patricia came to stand beside him. Lewis's assistant came back from her coffee at 9:15, she said. Walked in, walked back out. Currently in the lobby calling her employment attorney. Can't blame her, no. A pause. Wilson, I made an error. Her voice had the quality of someone who did not say those words often and understood the weight of saying them. I didn't see Moore in the woods on Sunday. My team's positioning left a gap in the eastern perimeter. If Moore had been more certain about what he saw, if he'd committed to acting instead of waiting, we would have lost the recording and possibly lost you. She didn't soften it. Patricia Johnson did not soften things as a general practice. I should have closed that gap. I didn't. You handled what came from that. Anthony looked at her. You're telling me this now. I'm telling you now, because I wanted the arrest to be complete before I told you, so you couldn't be angry about it until it was already over. A beat. Something at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same vicinity. And because you deserved to know when something went right, because someone else got something wrong. Not only because you're good under pressure, he nodded. Thank you, Patricia. She put her reading glasses back on their chain, picked up her folio. I still think you should have told me about the Camry on Monday. She turned and walked away. But the rest of it was excellent work, from Patricia Johnson. That was a standing ovation. Brian Thompson was arrested at his office at 2:17 in the afternoon. Kevin Moore was taken at his home at 4:30. Not dramatic, not early morning, just 2 agents with a warrant, and Kevin opening his front door and looking at them the way a man looks when he has been waiting for a specific knock and has finally heard it. Not surprised, just finished with the waiting. Stephanie Harris called her attorney at noon and began cooperation discussions by 3, sitting in the federal building parking lot that evening, the heat running, the glass facade, reflecting what was left of the October light. Sandra told Anthony that Lewis, in his initial processing conversation, had confirmed that the name he'd been using, Reese, the name that appeared on the shell company paperwork, the name he'd introduced himself with at 2 industry conferences over the past 3 years, came from a regional trucking company he'd quietly owned through a private entity. A company he'd used to move the stolen inventory. He had named himself after his own mechanism. He had, apparently, found this satisfying. He thought it was clever, Sandra said. Was it? For 3 years it was. She turned the fountain pen once in her fingers, which is the thing about cleverness. It runs right up until it runs out. Anthony looked out the windshield. "How are you?" he said. Not his usual question. But the usual question wasn't right for today. She was quiet for a long moment. "I gave that man a pen," she said, 3 years ago, because he sent me a handwritten note about the company's trajectory. And the handwriting was good. And I thought, this is someone who understands that how you do small things says something about how you do large things. She turned the pen again. "I was 26. I had just started to believe I could actually run this company, rather than just inherit it. And I read handwriting the way you read handwriting, when you want very badly to find someone trustworthy, and are not yet practiced enough at distinguishing between trustworthy and convincing." She looked at the pen. "I keep the pen in my desk. I've been using it. I need to stop using it. Throw it out? I'm going to throw it out." She didn't throw it out that night. She would put it in a small wooden box that had been her grandmother's, in a desk drawer, and leave it there, and occasionally over the following years, she would open the drawer and look at it. Not as a reminder of Lewis, but as a reminder of herself, at 26, learning to read people more accurately. The pen would stay in the box. The box would stay in the drawer. Some things you kept not because they were good, but because forgetting them cost more than remembering them. Anthony's phone buzzed. Angela. A photo. Lily in her coat outside the school, holding up a drawing. The drawing was a person in a suit, very tall. The suit colored in with brown crayon because Lily had run out of black. He looked at it for a moment. Sandra leaned over slightly and looked at the screen. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh. The sound of someone being surprised by a feeling they hadn't budgeted for, in a parking lot, at the end of a day that had been full of other things. "She drew you," Sandra said. "Yeah," before she knew how it went. Anthony looked at the drawing. Lily had given the figure a large smile. The smile was the most confident line in the picture. Heavier pressure, more certain than anything else. She had drawn the smile first. He could tell. "She knows her father," he said. Not pride exactly, just accuracy. She drew him the way he comes home, not the way he left. Sandra looked at the photo for a moment longer. Then she sat back. They drove. He picked Lily up from Angela's at 5, on the dot. She came out in her coat and her new boots, looked at him in the suit, and said, in the voice she used when she was having a feeling she hadn't categorized yet, "Bah. You look different. I had a work day. A good one?" He crouched down to her level in the parking lot outside Angela's building. The late afternoon light already going amber and low the way it did in October when the day didn't apologize for ending early. A very good one. She considered this. Then she took his hand and they walked. He bought her ice cream on the way home. The shop on River Street that stayed open past Columbus Day because the owner, a man named Harold Reed, believed in ice cream as a year-round proposition regardless of what the thermometer said. Harold looked at the suit, looked at Anthony's face, made no comment, made 2 ice creams, 1 scoop each, and did not charge him. "I heard some things went well today for certain people," Harold said. Anthony looked at him. Harold went back to wiping the counter. "Small city," he said. They walked home eating ice cream in October, which was the correct way to end a day that had started the way this one had started, and arrived where it arrived. Weeks moved. The way weeks move when the large thing has happened and life is recalibrating to the new shape of itself. Not dramatically, just steadily. The way a river finds its level after the dam comes down. Kevin Moore entered a plea in late November. 3 years at a minimum security facility in New Hampshire. Stephanie Harris cooperated fully and received probation, conditions, a monitoring period, a record that would follow her, which was its own sentence. Brian Thompson took his plea in December, 4 years. His son at the university in Rhode Island found out through the news before anyone called him, which was brutal in the specific way that information delivered impersonally was brutal. And Anthony thought about that specifically. That young man, a Tuesday morning, reading something on his phone that rewrote the last 2 years of his life and the understanding he'd had of his father. He thought about it for a while before he set it down, because Patricia had been right. You carried what was yours to carry. The rest was going to happen regardless of whether you carried it too. Sandra had quietly, through a legal structure Patricia helped design, arranged a trust that would cover the son's remaining tuition. The son wouldn't know where it came from for 2 more years. When he eventually traced it, he would write Sandra a letter. She would keep the letter in the same drawer as the pen, in the small wooden box that had been her grandmother's. Jeffrey Lewis went to trial. That came in June, which was 8 months after October, and Anthony did not attend the proceedings. He submitted a victim impact statement, which the federal attorney Carroll helped him write in language that was plain and precise. At the same time, the two things managing to occupy the same sentences in a way that was unusual, and that Carroll said she would remember. The statement described a man who had worked a loading dock for 2 years and 7 months, and knew which bay doors stuck in cold weather, and which forklifts pulled left. It described a Tuesday morning in October, and a 7-year-old daughter eating cereal dry from the box because they were out of milk. It described $2 in a wallet. It described what it meant to have a daughter who said, "I know you didn't do anything bad," with the certainty of a fact she had stopped needing to verify. It did not describe Kevin Moore's hand going to his collar. That part Anthony kept. The judge read 2 sentences from the statement during sentencing. Lewis received 9 years on 11 counts. Sandra was in the back of the courtroom, in a black coat, hands in her lap. When the verdict came in, she made one small nod, the kind of nod she made in board meetings when a number was confirmed, stood up, and left. That evening she drove to Burlington and had dinner with Anthony and Lily at the Thai restaurant, 2 blocks from Birch Street. She did not mention the verdict. Anthony did not ask. Lily told her at length, and with significant narrative energy, about a substitute teacher who had eaten a worm on a dare. Sandra listened with complete attention and laughed at the end. The real laugh, the one that came out when she had been carrying something all day and was finally in a place where she could set it down. The job continued, 3 months of what Anthony privately called the road tour, visiting every Midwest logistics facility in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, arriving at 4 in the morning, drinking bad coffee in break rooms, asking the questions that weren't on any corporate survey. Not what are your metrics? What's broken? What are you afraid to say out loud? Who in this building do you trust and why? And who don't you and why? The answers arrived carefully at first. People didn't know what to make of him, a man with a company badge who sat in their break room and asked things that didn't sound like management. After a few weeks, the word moved through the informal channels that this was someone worth talking to. And then the answers came with more honesty. He came back to Montpelier every Friday with a notebook. Sandra read the notebooks every Friday afternoon in her office on the top floor of the Burlington headquarters building, which had windows that faced the lake. She had coffee ready when he arrived. She'd stopped asking how he took it somewhere around the 3rd Friday. They talked for an hour, sometimes 2. About what the notebooks contained and about what the notebooks pointed toward. About the gap between what an organization said it valued and what it actually made possible at 5 in the morning when no one from the main office was watching. One Friday in January, she looked up from a page and said, "Pittsburgh, Marcus Green. Your notes say he's one of the strongest supervisors in the system." Darnell's reports show his section underperforming against standard metrics because the metrics measure the documented process. Marcus' crew figured out a better process 3 years ago and switched to it. The better process looks like deviation when you run it against what the documentation says should be happening. Sandra looked at him. So the data says he's failing at a process he correctly identified as inferior and replaced with something that works better. Right, and this wasn't visible to anyone above him. Nobody above him spends time on that dock at 5 in the morning. She wrote something in the margin of the notebook, then looked up. What would you do? Promote Marcus Green. Have him document what his crew does and why. Make that the procedure. Redesign the metrics around what the work actually is, instead of what we told it to be. A pause. Then do that in a dozen other facilities where the same thing is probably happening and nobody knows to look. Sandra looked at him for a moment. Then out the window at the January lake, gray and perfectly still, the way things went just before they froze. When I hired you, she said, I told you I needed someone who could see people. Yeah. I undersold it. She turned the pen. A different pen now. Nothing with history attached to it. I needed someone who could see through the systems to the people running them and understand that sometimes the people have built better systems than we gave them. She paused. That's not something you can hire for out of a business school. It's not rare, Anthony said. It's just invisible from where you usually sit. She held that. I need you to put that in writing, she said. A memo. Addressed to me. So I can present it to the board with your name on it. He almost laughed. You want to cite me in a board presentation? I want the board to understand that the person making this argument spent 2 years and 7 months on a loading dock and arrives at the understanding from there, not from a case study, even deliberate. I want them to feel appropriately humbled by that. February. The Sunday she came to Birch Street with the binder. He had planned. Work through the materials 2 hours maximum, done before Lily got back from Angela's quilting afternoon. He had not planned the rest of it. She arrived at 1:10, Darnell in a car at the corner doing what Darnell did. She came up the stairs alone, carrying the binder and a canvas bag. She wore jeans and a sweater, and her hair was in a braid. She looked, for the first time since Anthony had known her, approximately the age she actually was. She took her shoes off at the door without being asked. She looked around the apartment the way someone looks around a person's home, not assessing it, just taking it in. She stepped carefully around the small rug in the hallway, the one from a yard sale the summer before Lorraine got sick, the blue and rust one Lorraine had carried home on the bus because she said it was exactly the color of autumn. This is a good place, Sandra said. It's okay. No. She looked at the bookshelf, the thrift store lamp, the window with the alley tree visible beyond it. It's a good place. It feels like somewhere someone actually lives. He made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table and went through the binder. 2 hours, efficient, the way their work sessions always were. Questions that went straight to the center of things, answers that didn't hedge more than necessary. Around 3, she stood to stretch and drifted toward the window shelf, the way people drifted toward photographs when they were in a room that had them. She stopped in front of the photo of Lorraine, the camping trip. Catskills, the summer before the diagnosis. Lorraine laughing with her hair across her face, caught in the middle of something she'd found funny. Sandra looked at it for a long time. Tell me about the picture, she said. Catskills. We drove 3 hours and forgot the tent poles. What did you do? Slept in the truck. Both of us in the cab, with the seats pushed back as far as they'd go. He came back into the room with the refilled cups, set hers on the edge of the shelf. Lorraine thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to her. She laughed until she cried. Said it was the best camping trip she'd ever been on, because we'd removed all the parts that required effort. Sandra smiled. Not the controlled smile, the one she used when she was being Sandra Anderson, the CEO. The other one. She sounds like someone who knew how to be wherever she was, she said. That was exactly it. She didn't want to be somewhere with more to offer. She was just in the thing that was happening, and she found what was in it. He stood beside her, both of them looking at the photograph. I've been trying to get back to that, being in the thing, instead of wishing it was a different thing. Sandra was quiet, Anthony, low, careful. The voice she used when she was saying something she had prepared and was now delivering exactly as prepared. I need to tell you something. I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I just need to say it once, out loud. He waited. The man I was going to marry died 6 years ago. His plane went down in Colorado. He was checking a property investment on my behalf. She said it the way she said things she had decided to be completely accurate about. Not armored, not braced, just true. I was 24. And after that I built things. I built the company, rebuilt it, restructured it, expanded it. I built systems and processes and reporting structures and teams. I built it so thoroughly and so continuously that somewhere in there I stopped knowing what was underneath all the building. She looked at the photograph of Lorraine. I didn't know what was underneath it until I sat at a bus stop at 4 in the morning, and a man in a cracked windshield truck stopped and told me the bus didn't run there anymore. He looked at her. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "You have Lily. You have Lorraine in this photograph. You have a life that is full of real things, and I am not trying to rearrange any of it, a breath. I'm just telling you that for the first time in 6 years, I have conversations I think about afterward. Not because they were useful, because they were real. Because the person I was having them with was actually there, in the conversation, not managing it." She paused. "That matters to me. I needed you to know it mattered." He stood there with his coffee cup and thought about something Lorraine used to say, which was that the only way to know if a thing was real was to put your whole weight on it and see what happened. Not a test of the thing, a commitment to it. You didn't put your weight on it and watch from outside. You put your weight on it, and you were either right about it being solid, or you fell through it, and either way you had your answer. "I think about the conversations too," he said. "Not just because they're useful." He looked at the photograph of Lorraine, at the woman laughing in summer light, and then at the woman standing beside him in the gray February afternoon. "That's the only thing I'm afraid of. Wrong for who? For Lily. For you. For me." He said it without hedging. "I don't want to move because things feel a certain way and discover I moved past something I needed to stand in a while longer. I'm not in a hurry." She held his gaze. "I waited 6 years. I can wait longer." "Not that long," he said, because it was true and she deserved the actual answer. Something moved through her face, not a smile. The country that a smile moved through on its way to becoming a smile. "No," she said. "Not that long." She picked up her coffee. Looked at Lorraine's photograph one more time. "She would have had opinions about all of this," Sandra said, loud ones. Expressed at full volume, probably while doing something else. "I think I would have liked her. She would have liked you." He thought about it. "She also would have given you an extraordinarily hard time. Not because she didn't like you. Because that was her way of showing it." Sandra laughed. The real laugh. The one that arrived when something genuinely caught her. The laugh that made the room feel like it had more people in it. They went back to the binder. She left at 4:30. She put her hand on his forearm briefly at the door. Not a handshake, not a hug. Something between them that didn't have a name yet. Then she went down the stairs and out to the street where Darnell was waiting, and Anthony closed the door and stood in the apartment in his socks and looked at the window and thought about what it meant that his body already knew what his head was still catching up to. Lily came home at 6. She looked at his face when she came in and said, with the accuracy she'd inherited from her mother, "Something happened. Just a good afternoon. Okay." She took off her coat and her boots. Then, was Sandra here? He looked at her. There's a second coffee cup on the table. She went to her room to put her backpack away. "It's fine, Ba. I was just asking." He stood in the kitchen and thought about how a 7-year-old who read at 5th grade level and paid attention to coffee cups was going to be an absolute force when she was older, and how he both looked forward to this and would need to prepare. March, Lily's 8th birthday. He threw her a small party at the apartment. Angela came, bringing food she'd made at home. 2 of Lizzie's classmates arrived with their parents. Daniel Brooks came. Jason Walker came with his wife, a small woman who called him my bear in a way that suggested this was accurate. Patricia arrived and cried quietly at the kitchen table in a way that surprised everyone in the room, including Patricia, who recovered by immediately proposing a better organizational method for the dessert table. Terry Coleman came. He had asked Anthony in February if he could come, standing in a parking lot, not calling ahead, driving over from the other side of town to make the ask in person. He hadn't offered a specific reason beyond wanting to. Anthony had said yes. Coleman spent most of the party standing near the wall with his hands at his sides, watching Lily blow out candles, and when he shook Anthony's hand at the door on the way out, he said, "I'm glad you made it." He didn't say he was sorry. He had said sorry in October, in Coleman's own office, before the end of that conversation. This was different. This was something else. Sandra came. She stood in the kitchen with a bowl and a spatula, because Anthony had handed them to her when she said she wanted to be useful, and she frosted Lily's birthday cake with the systematic confidence of a woman who had run a company across 32 states, and the result was the worst decorating either of them had ever seen. The frosting went on unevenly, listing to the left, with a color distribution that suggested the frosting had formed its own opinions about where it wanted to be. Lily looked at the cake. Lily looked at Sandra. "This," Lily said, with the gravity of someone delivering a judgment that had weight, "is the best cake I have ever seen in my life." Sandra blinked, the unguarded blink, not the composed one. "It's a bit uneven," Sandra said. "It's perfect," Lily said, and sat down and waited for the candles, with the patience of someone who had decided the matter was settled. Anthony stood at the counter and watched Sandra Anderson watch Lily, and watched something move through Sandra's face that he had not seen there before. Not the CEO. Not the woman with the 4 black SUVs and the contingency planning. Something older and simpler than all of those things. Something that had been under the building all along. She had told him she'd built the systems to cover some things she'd lost. He thought he might be watching her, remember where she'd put it. The candles burned. Lily blew them out in one breath. She always got it in one. She had practiced. She approached birthday candles with the seriousness of athletic preparation. Everyone applauded. Sandra applauded. The sound of her clapping was the sound of someone who meant it without reservation, which was its own kind of rare. 2 weeks before the party, Lily had sat Anthony down at the kitchen table with her library book closed and her hands flat on the table in 3 conditions. 1. Sandra would be called Sandra. That was her name, and it was the right name, and it was the name that was going to be used. 2. Sandra would teach Lily to drive when Lily was old enough to learn. Sandra had mentioned once, in passing, that she had learned to drive at 12 on a family friend's farm in upstate New York. And Lily had stored this information and retrieved it at the appropriate moment. 3. Anthony would not stop being her father. Not for any portion of any day, for any reason, under any circumstance. This was not a request. This was a statement of what was true and what would remain true and what was not under negotiation. Anthony had started to respond to the 3rd condition, and Lily had stopped him. "I know," she said. "I know you know, but some things need to be said out loud to be true. So I'm saying it out loud." He had let her say it, because she was right. Some things needed to be said out loud. They got married in October. 2 years to the week from the morning Anthony Wilson had signed his name's name on a termination notice in Terry Coleman's office, with everything spelled correctly, and only the essential thing wrong. The leaves were at their peak, which in Vermont meant something. The hills going orange and red and gold in every direction, the air carrying the smell of it, clean and cold and exact. The bus stop at the corner of Chestnut and Vine, Sandra's idea. He had laughed when she first said it. Then he looked at her face and stopped laughing, because her face was not the face of someone who had been joking. There was a plaque. He had found it in April, walking past on his way back from the coffee shop on Main, not looking for anything. A small bronze rectangle mounted on the side of the shelter's plastic panel, the metal already beginning to develop the particular green tinge that Vermont weather gave to bronze. The town had placed it without notifying anyone. He had never been told. Sandra had never been told. It had simply appeared the way small acts of civic grace occasionally appeared in small Vermont cities, quiet and unprompted and meant. Kenness has been known to stop here. No names. No date. He had stood there for 11 minutes. He knew because he'd checked his watch before and after and done the subtraction. He had called Sandra. She had gone quiet on the phone. Not the calculating quiet, the other kind. Then she had said, in the voice she used when something had surprised her past the point where she could manage the surprise, "That is the most Vermont thing I have ever heard in my life." So they held the ceremony at the bus stop. 23 people on the sidewalk of Chestnut Avenue in October coats. Because October in Vermont required coats, and the weather did not adjust itself for occasions. Angela Young was there, in the new coat she had finally found to replace the red one. Dark green, warm, purchased in September and saved for the right occasion. Lorraine's scarf around her neck. She had worn the scarf to every important day, since the funeral. And she wore it now, which was not a coincidence but a choice. A continuous choice she made every important morning. Patricia was there, reading glasses on their chain, not pretending she was not moved, which for Patricia was an act of considerable personal exposure. Darnell stood slightly apart from the group, with his hands clasped at his waist, watching the street in both directions out of a habit too long established to suspend even for a wedding. Nobody asked him to stop. It was a form of care. Terry Coleman stood near the back in a suit jacket one size too small, hands at his sides, looking at Lily during the ceremony more than at the couple, which seemed right. He had driven across town without being asked. He would drive back the same way. Monica Reed presided. 72 years old, retired justice of the peace, current proprietor of the hardware store on Main Street where Anthony had bought everything that had needed fixing in the Birch Street apartment over the past 2 years. She wore overalls under a heavy wool coat and had accepted the invitation in the same flat Vermont manner she accepted most things. Sure, what time? She was the only officiant either of them had ever considered. Monica said what she said in the way she did most things, without ornamentation, without reaching for more than she could carry. She said, 2 people came into a hard October. One of them was carrying nothing. One was carrying too much. Somehow they recognized each other in the middle of it and agreed, without using words, to help each other carry what they had been carrying alone. I think that's the start of most things that last, she said. I've been married 41 years, and I still think love is mostly a working theory. What I'm more confident about is stubbornness. A good marriage is mostly stubbornness about each other, the right kind, applied in the right direction. These two have that. She said a few other things. Brief and true. Anthony said his vows. He had written them twice and thrown both versions out and said them from the place below where the written versions had been drafted. Sandra, I didn't know the worst morning of my life was going to turn out to be one of the most important. I didn't know those 2 things could live in the same morning. I know it now. I'm going to try every day to be the man you decided to trust. Some days I'm going to fall short of that. On those days I'm going to tell you and try again the next day. Every other day I'm going to do my best, which is the only thing I have to offer you. I love you, Sandra said hers, Anthony. I sat at that bus stop because I had stopped believing there were honest people in the field working for my company. That's a hard thing to admit, but it's accurate. You stopped your truck. You didn't know me. You gave me the last money you had on the worst morning you'd had in years, because your wife told you the world runs on people doing small stupid things for each other. And you had decided to find out if she was right. She paused. I have been surprised by you every week since that morning. I am marrying you because I want to keep being surprised. And because when a man tells you that you have a good face and means it as an observation rather than a compliment. She stopped. Well, you just do, Monica said. You may. They did. Brief and right, the kind of kiss that didn't need to perform. Angela cried quietly with Lily's hand in hers, Angela's fingers tight. Lily did not cry. Lily considered it inefficient, but she let Angela hold her hand as long as Angela needed to hold it. 3 cars drove past during the ceremony. 2 of them honked. Neither driver knew what was happening on that sidewalk. This was Vermont. And Vermont honked at things it didn't fully understand, which was its own form of acknowledgement. After, they walked 2 blocks to the restaurant with the back room. They ate for a long time. Daniel Brooks told a story about the logging road off Route 12A in October that had everyone very quiet and then laughing harder than the story technically warranted. Darnell told one about driving 4 black SUVs down Birch Street at 8:53 in the morning and wondering, briefly, if he had perhaps overdone it. He maintained he was still not certain. Monica Reed ate an entire basket of bread and praised nothing except the bread, At some point in the evening, Anthony stepped outside. The restaurant backed onto a narrow alley with a single string of lights along the eave, and a wooden chair someone had left out in better weather and not brought in. He sat in it and looked up at the strip of October sky, visible between the buildings and the stars, doing what stars did in Vermont when you got far enough from the city lights to see them properly. Being present in numbers that felt extravagant. He thought about Lorraine. He let himself think about her, completely, without managing it. She was his, and that was permanent, and it didn't conflict with anything happening tonight. He had been afraid for a long time that grief worked as a zero-sum system, that making room for something new required giving up space that had been hers. He had been wrong about that, and the wrongness of it had been one of the things he had to discover by walking through rather than reasoning from the outside. There was room. There had always been room. The heart was not a fixed container. He thought about Kevin Moore in a minimum security facility in New Hampshire, probably on a dinner shift about now, and he noticed that he didn't feel satisfaction about this, and didn't feel the absence of satisfaction either. Kevin Moore had become someone he didn't think about much. That had been the harder work, in some ways, not the investigation, not the wire, not Thompson's office. The harder work had been learning to stop carrying the people who had tried to take something from him. They had to be allowed to become people he didn't spend his time on, because spending time on them was a way of letting them keep what they'd tried to take. He had done mostly that. He was still doing it, a little. He thought about the $40, about the specific moment between knowing what he was going to do and doing it. The moment when his hand was in his wallet, and the numbers were obvious, and the numbers were also, in some cleaner part of him, beside the point. The right math had been clear. Give her $10. Go home. You have a daughter and a termination notice and 2 weeks until unemployment. That was the math. He had not done the right math. He had done the right thing instead, which was different. And the difference was not small. Some things were not math. He had known this his whole life, but had not always had the words for it. Had known it in the way you know things your body understands before your vocabulary catches up. The world ran on people doing small, stupid things for each other. Sometimes those things cost $40. Sometimes they cost more. Sometimes they came back in the shape of a life you could not have designed or requested or imagined your way into from the outside. But the coming back wasn't why you did them. You did them because there was a part of you that couldn't be purchased or threatened into silence, a part that answered to something other than the calculation. And every time you let that part make the call, every time you acted from it instead of routing around it, it became more precisely what it was. And then one morning you drove past a bus stop. The door behind him opened. Sandra came out, still in her dress. Cream, simple, the dress of someone who had chosen something real rather than something impressive. She had taken her hair down somewhere in the last hour. She carried 2 small glasses and sat on the wooden crate beside his chair, because there was only the one chair, and she was not going to ask him to give it up. You're missing the party. I'm coming back in. Darnell is trying to explain the logging road operation to Patricia. Patricia keeps correcting him, a beat. Patricia is not wrong. He almost laughed. She held out one of the glasses. He took it. What are you thinking? She said. He looked at the stars. I'm thinking about the $40, he said, and about how it wasn't enough to know what the right thing was. I had to actually do it. The knowing and the doing are different things. They feel the same from inside them, but they're not. He looked at her. Most people, when they're afraid of the doing, not the knowing. She was quiet. What made you do it? She said. Not why. What? He thought about it honestly. Because I didn't want to be the kind of person who knew what the right thing was and drove past it anyway. He paused. Because my daughter was going to be 7, and then 8, and then 17, and then 30, and somewhere in there she was going to face a moment that cost her something real. And I needed to already be the person she could look at when she faced it. You don't hand your kids a version of yourself you haven't built yet. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between them and took his hand. Not tentatively. Fingers through fingers, full and certain, the way she had started holding on somewhere around March, when the careful version of everything had become unnecessary. Inside the restaurant, through the wall, laughter was building. The kind that starts with one person and becomes everyone before it's finished. He could hear Lily's laugh in it. He knew it the way he knew the forklifts and the bay doors and the three-buzz pattern of the light above Station 4. He knew it because it was his, because she was his. Because some things you knew not from study but from being present long enough that they became part of the way you understood the world. The stars were doing their work above the alley. Sandra held his hand. Anthony Wilson sat in a wooden chair behind a restaurant on a Thursday night in October in Vermont and knew. Not for the first time, but for the first time without the footnotes, without the qualifications, without the part of him that was still checking, that he was in the right life. Not a perfect life. Not a life without the things that had been lost. A life where the losses were in it honestly, where Lorraine was in the photograph on the shelf, and in the way Lily laughed and in the yarn and plywood weight of everything he'd built in the years since, and where none of that was separate from what he was sitting in now. It was all the same life. It had always been the same life. He had just needed to drive past a bus stop. Inside, someone called for a toast. Darnell's voice, which meant it would be brief and slightly formal and completely sincere. Anthony finished the last of his glass. "Ready?" Sandra said. "Not a question." "Yeah," he said. "Let's go back in." They went back in. The party continued. The lights were warm. The food was good. Lily was telling a story to 3 adults who were giving her their complete attention. And the story had all the hallmarks of a Lily story. Precise in the details that mattered. Generous in the details that were entertaining, building towards something that would land exactly where she intended it to land. Anthony stood in the doorway of the back room for a moment and watched his daughter hold a room. She looked over and saw him. Waved once, brief and certain, already back to the story before her hand came down. He went in.